Chapter 93. Light and shadow swayed in the cave. Even the simple and crude environment appeared moving because of the firelight. The shrubbery was tightly blocked at the entrance of the cave, and the cold wind could not enter. Jiang Yuan leaned against the stone wall in front of the fire and closed her eyes wearily. At such a tense time, a man and a woman alone, she was relieved that Xiao Xiao would not do anything to her. In her previous life, he was famous for his indifference towards women. Xianli had tried to send him beauties many times, but in the end, he could only return empty-handed. Moreover, she was only 11 years old, and she was in such a sorry state. If Xiao Xiao really had any intentions, he would be blind. After taking Xiao Xiao's medicine and eating, her body gradually warmed up. After a day of running, she was too tired, and finally, she could not help but fall asleep. Before she fell asleep, she thought about how Xiao Xiao had answered the question she had asked him before. He had said, "I, Xiao, owe you a life." What did that mean? Jiang Yuan fell into a deep sleep. After a while, the young man, who was staring at the fire, turned his head and stared at Jiang Yuan thoughtfully. The girl had shed her usual sharp and vicious aura, leaving only a gentle and beautiful appearance. Her facial features were bright and beautiful, and under the light of the fire, there was a faint charm. Given time, she would definitely be a great beauty. However, Xiao Xiao's heartstrings were not moved by the beautiful scene in front of him. He only lowered his head and felt for an object in his sleeve. It was the pendant with a bright jade butterfly in love with a flower. He slightly lowered his eyes, and his slender fingertips stroked the pendant. An indescribable emotion gradually emerged in his eyes. Time seemed to rewind to 5 years ago. 5 years ago, he had been in the Imperial Bodyguard for 5 years. He had just left the school when he received a mission from a fierce commander of the southern frontier. This commander was not to be feared, but there was a strange shaman by his side. In order to establish his power in the Imperial Bodyguard, and also to keep the mission secret, he went deep into the southern frontier alone. After 7 days and 7 nights, he killed the commander and shaman. The shaman also used his familiarity with the southern frontier's terrain to poison him. The people of the southern frontier would not cure him. The 15-year-old boy rode back to the capital on a horse and narrowly escaped death. There were countless people in the capital who wanted his life. The people of the southern frontier also released the news that he was seriously injured, and the capital was full of murderous intentions. However, no matter how skilled he was in martial arts, he was unable to defend against the onslaught of the poison. He was extremely weak, and on his way back to the capital, he was ambushed all the way. He was riddled with scars, and it was the heaviest injury he had suffered since birth. In front was an ambush, and behind was a pursuer. In a hurry, he hid in a room in Baoguang Temple. But there was someone in the room. Under the moonlight, a 5 or 6-year-old girl stared at him, dumbfounded. Xiao Xiao frowned, and the dagger in his hand flashed. However, the girl clumsily rushed over and said in surprise, "Are you injured?" There were countless injuries on his body, and his black clothes were already soaked. Although it couldn't be seen, it reeked of blood. While he was in a trance, the girl had already knelt down beside him. She took out a small porcelain bottle from her bosom and said, "This is medicine. Are you all right?" It was just a normal medicine. The girl opened his clothes carefully. He was cautious, but when he saw the girl's clumsy posture, he found it funny. Such a small girl, she was a servant. He really did think that she was a maid, because this little girl was dressed like a maid, and her words were simple and quick-witted. When the moonlight shone down, her face was clearly illuminated. She was as smooth as jade and as round as pearls, full of spirit. She had a pair of big eyes that were quick-witted and clear. She was a natural beauty. Although she was a servant, she did not look like one. He was surprised. The girl insisted on helping him apply the medicine. His body was extremely weak and he could not move at all. He thought that he would definitely die tonight. Even if he could avoid being killed, he might not be able to endure until the poison took effect. Either way, he would die, so he let the girl do whatever she wanted. The girl saw his breathing was getting weaker. Tears welled up in her eyes. She stood up and ran out. He thought the girl must have gone out to call for help, but he did not have the strength to stop her. He was too lazy to stop her, so he sat in the room, waiting for the moment his life ended. The moonlight was waning. The young man was beautiful, but his expression was cold. He walked through the sea of fire. The higher he went, the more stable he was, but the lonelier he became. He did not know the meaning of living, and he did not know what he was living for. Not long after, the girl came back again. She was holding food and clean water in her hands. Her face was still a little dirty. She timidly pushed the food to his side. Eat. You'll have strength after eating. Xiao Xiao knew medicine. Seeing the marks on the girl's face, he knew she was injured. How could someone beat up such an intelligent and beautiful young lady like this? He frowned and looked at the food on the ground. Then, he understood. He thought that the little maid must have stolen food for him and was discovered by others. That was why she was covered in scars. His heart moved slightly. The girl looked at him longingly. Seeing that he was not moving, she picked up the bowl and brought it to his lips. He was really thirsty, so he lowered his head and drank. Although the girl moved with difficulty, she looked very skilled. It seemed that she often served people tea. Don't die. The girl looked at him and said, I won't tell others that you are here. Xiao Xiao did not speak. The girl began to feed him steamed buns again. She slowly spoke. It was nothing more than that in a few days, the pear blossoms on the west mountain would bloom, and the peach blossoms on the east mountain would also bloom. She wanted to go with her parents to see the flowers and grass. She wanted to make new clothes and shoes. The girl next door had a small hunting dog. She also wanted one. Her older brother's essay had been praised by the father and son. In the future, he would definitely be the top scholar. She rambled on, trying to say something interesting to make him happy and not fall asleep. Her intentions were so immature that Xiao Xiao did not understand. Although he was not interested in the other's intentions, he just listened as a joke. He felt that this child must have a happy family. That was why she was so kind and warm. Even the things that came out of her mouth were full of interest. That night, the poison unexpectedly did not act up. The simple medicine and food also gradually restored his strength. In the meditation room at the back of Baoguang Temple, the night was full of moonlight and a spring breeze. A young man and a girl, one sitting quietly, the other talking. The scene was surprisingly harmonious. She talked the whole night. In the morning of the second day, the temple bell rang. Someone outside called softly, Mississippi. The girl suddenly stood up, my maid is looking for me. You should leave now that you have recovered. Be careful not to be discovered. So she was not a maid. Xiao Xiao whispered, thank you. The girl had already walked to the door. When she heard his words, she suddenly turned around and looked at him with a smile, no need to thank me. Today, I saved your life. In the future, if I am also in danger and you happen to pass by, you can save my life again. That day, he did not die. After his body gradually recovered in Baoguang Temple, he sent a signal to the brocade guards. When he returned to the city, with an unstoppable force, he swiftly and decisively dealt with the assassins in the city. He sat firmly as the master of the 300,000 brocade guards. For a time, the capital was secretly cleansed with blood. Since then, everyone in the imperial court hated him, and he was known as a rebel and traitor. He did not know who the girl in Baoguang Temple was. He only picked up the earring that she had dropped. The Xiao family would always repay kindness. They sent Yifeng to investigate. Yi Feng found out that the Jiang family's young lady went to offer incense that day. It was the Jiang family's second Mississippi. Therefore, on the Ling Long boat, when Jiang Su Su was in a desperate situation, he remembered the promise of, in the future, if I am also in trouble and you happen to pass by, you can save my life again, and helped her once. When Xiao Xiao was young, he had lived a life of licking blood on the edge of a knife. He had endured what ordinary people could not and experienced what ordinary people could not. His intuition was surprisingly accurate. After saving Jiang Su Su, he already felt that something was wrong. Jiang Su Su's reputation in the capital was excellent. She was also known as a fairy. She was kind, innocent, talented, and the apple of the Jiang family's eye. She was very much in line with the kind-hearted girl that night. However, with one glance, he could see the girl's hypocrisy and pretentiousness. In fact, it was difficult to connect the two of them. At this time, Jiang Ruan appeared. Jiang Ruan's eyes were very similar to the girl's, but also different. The murderous intent in Jiang Ruan's eyes was too heavy. She was vicious and merciless. She was skilled in killing with a borrowed knife. With such shrewdness, she was like a different person from the girl that night. Moreover, Jin 1 and Jin 2 had investigated that Jiang Ruan had not been valued in the Jiang Fu since she was young. Jiang Quan did not like her, her mother had died young, and her elder brother had been depressed. How could she be as happy as the girl had said? Intuition and reality were poles apart. Now that the truth had come to light, everything became clear. It turned out that Jiang Su Su was really not the girl that night. Since Jiang Ruan was originally a member of Baoguang Temple, how could she change from her usual innocent and kind temperament to become so overbearing? 5 years of oppression in the rural residence, as well as her biological father and stepmother making things difficult for her, was it possible for her to change her temperament? Even if she had changed her temperament, how could these methods be used by a young girl? There was also her mysteriousness. Hui Ju's prophecy was all thanks to her. She could also predict the flood in the capital in advance. Who was she? Xiao Xiao put the pendant back into his sleeve. His eyes were like bright stars in the night, and he pursed his lips. With this pendant as a trust, he owed Jiang Ruan his life. He would repay her in the future. Many thanks, he said in a low voice. Jiang Ruan had a dream. The time of this dream was too long ago. She was not very clear, but it seemed to be 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Zhao Mei was seriously ill in bed. When the doctors came to see her, they all said that there was no way to save her, and that they could only wait to prepare for her funeral. She looked at Zhao Mei's emaciated appearance as she lay on the bed, and the sorrow in her heart could not be contained. Coincidentally, it was the annual day to go to Baoguang Temple to offer incense. Baoguang Temple's first incense was the most efficacious. She wanted to offer incense, but Jiang Quan said that Zhao Mei was seriously ill. As his biological daughter, she should stay in the Fu to wait for her illness. At that time, she was depressed and indignant, but she did not dare to openly refute Jiang Quan. Thus, she decided to secretly follow Xia Yan in her daughter's carriage, dress up as a servant girl of the Jiang Fu, and sneak in. When they arrived at Baoguang Temple, she would beg the abbot to allow her to offer incense and pray for Zhao Mei's illness to improve. Thus, she asked Lian Qiao to go with her, and asked Bai Ji to disguise herself as her. She changed into a servant girl's attire and really did blend in with the group of servants and old women of the Jiang Fu, and they went together to Baoguang Temple. To her, that was the most daring thing she had ever done. After successfully blending in with the crowd, she was very proud of herself for a while. However, she did not know that such an easy way to blend in was because Xia Yan had long known that she was in the crowd and had deliberately let her pass. Then, she hid in the meditation room when no one was paying attention, looking for an opportunity to slip out. Since she had mixed in, she could not eat vegetarian food with the servants, lest she be discovered. She could only sneak into the temple's kitchen to steal food, not wanting to be discovered. She sent it to the leading old woman of the Jiangfu, saying that she would discipline her properly. That old woman did indeed discipline her ruthlessly. She was beaten black and blue all over, but did not dare to make a sound, lest her identity as the eldest miss of the Jiang family be discovered. At that time, she was riddled with scars and barely managed to get a portion of food. However, the matter did not end there. On the second day, the first incense was not burned. Even for a large temple like Baoguang Temple, the incense money was actually based on donations. Xia Yan had donated quite a lot of incense money, so the first incense was burned by her. Thinking about it, her wish at that time was nothing more than for Zhao Mei and Jiang Ruan to die a horrible death. In her previous life, this incense had indeed come true. On the way back, Xia Yan had accidentally discovered her in the crowd. After returning to the Fu in a panic, everyone knew about it. When Jiang Quan found out that Bai Ji was pretending to be her, he flew into a rage. He made Bai Ji and her kneel in the main hall of the Fu to be punished according to the family rules. All the servants were present to listen. Shame, indignation, anger, grievance, at that time, there were thousands of emotions, but in the end, they could only turn into useless tears. For her sake, Jiang Xing had opposed Jiang Quan, and in a fit of rage, Jiang Quan had punished him to kneel in the ancestral hall for 3 days. When Zhao Mei heard of this, her condition worsened, and she was on the verge of death. The matter had caused such a commotion, and Xia Yan and Jiang Su had come to plead on her behalf. Now that she thought about it, she really wished that she could peel off the skin of this mother and daughter pair. It seemed that from then on, she had been grounded. The people of the capital only knew of the second miss of the Jiang family, and did not know who the eldest miss of the Jiang family was. From then on, Baoguang Temple had become her nightmare. In this life, Xia Yan still wanted to scheme against her in Baoguang Temple, but she had to see if she would agree or not. If Baoguang Temple had been her execution ground in her previous life, then in this life, it was the starting point of her massacre. The Prime Minister's Fu was just the beginning. At the end of that dream, there seemed to be a trace of moonlight. It was as if in the gentle night, there was a pair of eyes like cold stars, shining brightly and indifferently looking at her. Who was that? It was as if, in the memory of stealing the food, she had not eaten the food in the end. It was as if something special had happened in that meditation room. Time was like an old veil covering a precious treasure, quietly covering the memory. If one day, the spring wind just happened to pass by and lift a corner of the veil, the memory was like new, still emitting a faint luster. In her ear, there seemed to be a faint and cold sentence, "Many thanks." Who was it? Sunlight gradually penetrated through the dense undergrowth and shone into the cave. Because of the starry sunlight, the cave appeared mottled with green. The warm sunlight, which had not been seen for a long time, shone on the verdant mountain forest. In the empty mountains and high valleys, there was the crisp sound of birds chirping. Suddenly, they fluttered their wings and flew away. The tip of their tail touched the tranquil green lake, creating shallow ripples. The rain stopped. Jiang Ruan slowly opened her eyes. As soon as she did so, she saw the long-awaited sunlight enter the cave. After a night's sleep, her spirit was surprisingly good. She tilted her head, and suddenly, her body stiffened. The place where her body was leaning against was warm, her arms were tightly wrapped around an unfamiliar waist, and the cold, hard, black brocade material. She looked up all the way and met a pair of beautiful, drooping eyes. Jiang Ruan abruptly withdrew her hand. She had actually hugged hugged Xiao Xiao's waist and slept for the whole night. Looking at that posture, she had probably taken the initiative to hug him passionately. Jiang Ruan sucked in a breath. Xiao was completely unaware. Seeing that she had woken up, he stood up and said, "I left a mark outside. If they see it, they will quickly rush over." Jiang Ruan's clothes were already dry, so she took off the black and gold crane cloak covering her head and returned it to Xiao Xiao, saying, "Many thanks, Xiao Wangye." However, Xiao Xiao seemed to have thought of something. He turned to Jiang Ruan and said, "Your body is very weak, and you have a cold illness. In the Fu, pay more attention to the tea and food." He did not go overboard, but Jiang Ruan understood tacitly. Someone had poisoned her. Xiao Xiao saw through her doubts and said, "The cold illness was born in the womb. After that, it has been worsening for many years." Jiang Ruan lowered her head. So there was such a thing. In her previous life, had Jiang Quan and Xian Li already known about this matter, so they had not hesitated to let her enter the palace in place of Jiang Su Su and keep that healthy, perfect daughter of the Jiang family as the new emperor's empress. No, that was not it. Even if she did not have such a cold illness, Jiang Quan would not have kept her. Xian Li and Jiang Quan had chosen her as a sacrifice from the beginning. However, Xiao Xiao had still helped her by saying this. Him helping her like this made Jiang Wan recall Xiao Xiao's words from last night. Did he owe her a life? She wanted to ask clearly, but suddenly heard the sound of hooves in front of them. Xiao Xiao swept away the bushes at the entrance of the cave, and sure enough, he heard a pleasantly surprised voice, "Wangye." Jiang Wan followed him out. The sun was shining brightly outside, and in the forest, a troop of soldiers and horses saw them and rushed towards them. The one at the front was impressively Guan Liang Han's Jiang Xing. R1. Lao San. After searching for an entire night without any results, Guan Liang Han and Jiang Xing were extremely anxious, especially Jiang Xing. He hated that he had to overturn the entire mountain, and his hands had been shaking the whole way. Now that he saw that Jiang Ruan was safe and sound, he let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. Calling out Jiang Ruan's name, he galloped over on horseback. The soldiers also followed him and rushed over. In front of the cave, the black-clothed youth and the plain-clothed young girl were bathed in the sunlight. Looking from afar, they were pleasing to the eye. However, when Jiang Xing approached, his expression became complicated. Jiang Ruan's hair was disheveled, and her clothes were somewhat untidy. In her hands, she was still holding the black gold rain-embroidered crane cloak that the man wore. Because she had just woken up, her face was still somewhat flushed. She was like the most beautiful cloud in the morning sky, very tender and beautiful. On the other hand, Xiao Xiao's countenance was cold and clear, but at this moment, it was unknown what he was thinking about. His gaze softened slightly. Such a scene fell into the eyes of the crowd, and immediately, different thoughts arose in their hearts. These two people's appearances were rare in the world, and even when they were in a sorry state, they did not conceal their charm. Coupled with their current smiling movements, it caused everyone to coincidentally think of a sentence. Truly, exceptionally harmonious. Chapter 94. In Jinying Wangfu, Yifeng suddenly knelt down, "This subordinate has erred, please punish me, master." However, this matter had to be done. She originally wanted to hand it over to Jiang Xing, but Jiang Xing was currently only a deputy general. It would be difficult for him to get Li Dong and the other two out of prison. Even if he barely succeeded, if someone investigated in the future and something unexpected happened, it would bring disaster to Jiang Xing. Needless to say, Zhao Guang was a stubborn and neutral person. He might not agree to such a risk. He might even be suspicious of her actions. She changed her mind and no longer asked about the ins and outs. What was the point of asking about the ins and outs? She should make use of everything she could, such as Xiao Xiao in front of her. Xiao Xiao tied the copper pipe to the snow pigeon's leg. The snow pigeon tilted its head to look at him and pecked his fingers a few times. Xiao Xiao stroked its head and with a wave of his hand, the snow pigeon flew out of the window. Jiang Xing was stunned. The three yes were short, but they appeared extremely firm. Jiang Wan suddenly smiled and said, I understand. Since Xiao Wangye wants to return this favor, there is an opportunity right now. How could he say such shameless words? Who didn't know that she had only suffered minor injuries when she returned today? That day when she fell off the cliff, Xiao Xiao had even personally rescued her. Now, Jiang Xing had sent her back with such great fanfare. What was the meaning of this? She looked at Jiang Su Su, who was lying on the bed, and her eyes flashed with pain. Jiang Wan had actually said that her body was weak. Then what about her sewer? Now that she was lying on the bed with a disfigured face, what would she do when she woke up in the future? On the way back to the Fu, Jiang Xing asked Jiang Wan about what had happened between her and Xiao Xiao last night. Jiang Wan only said that nothing had happened, but Jiang Xing had a look of disbelief. He said, Wan, you are still young and there are many things you are not clear about. In the future, when you meet a man, you must open your eyes wide and see clearly. Don't let others deceive you with flowery words. After Yifeng left, Xiao Xiao picked up a brush and wrote a few words on a piece of paper in front of him. Then, he rolled the paper into a small roll and sent it into a small copper pipe. He fiddled with the bell on the table, and with two goo-goo sounds, a snow-white pigeon flew in from the window and landed on the desk in front of him. Yifeng, on the other hand, was stifling a bellyful of anger. In his heart, he cried out for his master's injustice. Thinking of his master's brilliant martial prowess, how many women in the capital wished they could throw themselves at him? Jiang Xing's expression clearly showed that Jiang Wan had taken advantage of his master. As he thought of this, he glared at Jiang Xing. Unfortunately, Xiao Xiao saw this. Xiao Xiao glanced at him indifferently, and Yifeng suddenly remembered the matter of the bright jade butterfly-loving flower pendant. His body trembled and he lowered his head. When the two of them returned to the Jiangfu, Lu Zhu and Bai Ji had already received the news and were waiting at the entrance of the Fu. When they saw Jiang Wan, their eyes reddened. Miss. Jiang Wan looked at him seriously and said, Ever since I was young, I have seen the world's most unfaithful and fickle men. How could I be so easily bewitched by other people's flowery words? Not to mention now, even if I reach marriageable age in the future, I don't want to marry a stranger and spend the rest of my life scheming against each other. As long as I can follow eldest brother, there is no harm in not marrying for the rest of my life. Who would have thought that she would reject her own people at the door, and even use such a high-sounding reason? Injured? In a weak state? Hearing this, Guan Lianghan and Jiang Xing's expressions became somewhat strange. Xiao Xiao took in all of his actions, but did not say anything. Guan Lianghan had already stepped forward and asked, Are you all right? Guan Lianghan was used to Jiang Xing's temperament of loving his sister as much as his own life, so he waved his hand and said, Go, go, don't make us sound like wolves. He thought that Jiang Wan was young, so naturally, she did not understand men. This Xiao Xiao, on the other hand, was a man through and through, and he seemed to be a person of high status and power. Jiang Wan was young and biased in her beliefs, so she might have been taken advantage of. Thinking of this, the gaze she used to look at Xiao Xiao became even more hostile. She was almost dazzled by this, but it was only for a short moment. She smiled slightly and said, Xiao Wangye said last night that he owes me a life. Jiang Wan muttered to herself. With Jiang Chao's temperament, it was not that he could not do such a thing. He was conceited and did not know how to endure silently. Once he felt that the situation was slightly advantageous, he would become complacent and forget himself. It was likely that on that day, the one who had met with an accident was definitely Jiang Wan. Jiang Su Su and the others had panicked in the carriage, but they had only put on an act. Moreover, they had not expected that the soldiers would arrive so quickly that he did not even have the time to pretend to be frightened by the bandits. Jiang Wan, Jiang Xing looked at his sister's serious expression and his heart trembled. Jiang Wan clearly did not have any expression, but at that moment, he felt a kind of bone-deep desolation. Even though they were blood brothers, he was unable to share even the slightest bit of the burden. He could only look at Jiang Ruan's lonely back, as if she was a ghost that would disappear from this world in the next second. Xia Yan was afraid that she would have to rack her brains over this matter again. Was this how she had been taught from a young age to look at men in the future? Jiang Wan followed her gaze, and sure enough, the wound from last night had already formed a shallow layer of scar. After thinking for a while, she took out the celadone bottle that Xiao Xiao had given her last night from her sleeve and said to Lien Qiao, "This is medicine for the wound, keep it." This medicine was so efficacious, there was no guarantee that it would be useful in the future. As soon as these words were spoken, the surroundings suddenly became silent. Even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard clearly. Everyone stared at the two of them with shining eyes. Jiang Xing blushed slightly, but his attitude was very firm. Jiang Wan smiled slightly, but the sarcasm in her eyes disappeared in a flash. She gently picked up the ginger sugar water in front of her and swirled it. The warm sugar water steamed up in spirals, blocking her gaze. Lu Zhu said impatiently, "What are you still waiting for? Quickly go and reply. Our family's young miss needs to recuperate, it would be better if she did not get hurt by you." In Yan Huayuan, after Xia Yan heard Lin Lang's reply, she was so angry that she smashed the teacup in front of her. She gritted her teeth and said, "She actually dares." The two of them walked towards the forest in front of them, with Xiao Xiao walking in front. After they had walked quite a distance, Xiao Xiao stopped and turned to her, saying, "We'll stop here, they can't hear us." Xia Yan clenched her fists tightly. As for Jiang Chao, how was he doing in prison? Jiang Quan had already gone to negotiate with the officials there, but colluding with rebels was not a small crime. He had originally thought that Jiang Wan had a good relationship with Xiao Xiao, so perhaps he could use Jiang Wan to get Xiao Xiao's help. If he used the excuse that they were sisters of the Jiang Fu, then for the sake of her reputation, Jiang Wan would have no choice but to seek Xiao Xiao's help. When Lu Zhu saw the medicine, she smelled it and knew that it was good stuff. Without another word, she took the porcelain bottle and went to find a place to put it away. Bai Ji returned with a bowl of ginger sugar water. Jiang Wan took it and drank a mouthful. She felt her ice-cold limbs warm up a little. She asked, "How are things in Yan Huayuan?" "It's just a flesh wound," Jiang Wan comforted him. She paused, then stepped forward and said, "Many thanks to Xiao Wanye for saving my life." Jiang Wan sighed inwardly and said to Jiang Xing, "Eldest brother, what kind of expectations do you think I would have for a man when I look at my father?" Just like that, he had already set his sights on her. Xiao Xiao had previously helped Jiang Su Su for no reason at all, which was already strange. However, all the signs later indicated that he did not seem to be standing on Jiang Su Su's side. There were many strange things about the Ling Long boat incident. After Jiang Su Su, Xiao Xiao had helped her several times. Just now, Jiang Wan had thought that if Xiao Xiao had previously recognized Jiang Su Su as her, then he might have indeed done what he had done at that time. Guan Lianghan had seen it with his own eyes, while Jiang Xing had heard it from someone else. In any case, Xiao Xiao and Jiang Wan were completely unrelated. Xiao Xiao had personally jumped down the cliff to save her. No matter how one listened, it was inconceivable. Guan Lianghan did not believe Mo Tsong's nonsense. Xiao Xiao was a cold-hearted person. How could he like a little girl whom he had only met a few times? Moreover, Guan Lianghan sized up Jiang Wan. Although she was beautiful, she was still young. There were many more women in the capital who were more charming than her, so she did not have any special charm. However, when he thought of the scene he had just witnessed, Guan Lianghan felt uncertain. She looked closely at Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao nodded, yes. Lu Zhu and Lien Qiao stepped forward to support Jiang Wan. When they saw the clothes on Jiang Ruan's body, they cried out in alarm, "Miss is injured." Jiang Ruan muttered to herself for a moment and struggled free of Jiang Xing's hand. "Eldest brother, I have a few words to say to Xiao Wanya alone." This was the truth. In this life, she had come with hatred only to kill her enemy and send him to hell. Even if she met one of the men that Jiang Xing had spoken of, she would not be able to, nor would she be willing to, get entangled with them. At that time, Lien Xiao had been hit by Li En's palm and vomited blood. She did not know how she was now. Lu Zhu said, "Lien Xiao Jijie is fine. Young master has invited a doctor to see her. He only said that she would need to rest for half a month." "Is Miss injured?" She carefully helped Jiang Wan clean the wound that she had carelessly treated last night with water. She said in surprise, "Oh, this wound has actually scabbed." Fortunately, it healed so quickly that it did not get bigger. After a moment, he said in a low voice, "That is still not appropriate, although all the men in this world are of the same virtue, you have to put up with them. You will always be able to find one or two who are not so bad. In short, you cannot remain unmarried for the rest of your life." Yi Feng stood obediently in the same place, but his ears perked up. The expression on his face was a mixture of sadness and joy. In his heart, he thought, "Not good, master's innocence is indeed gone." "Yes." Xiao Xiao answered. Bai Ji looked at her with some panic. Jiang Xing said, "Wan, I will go find a doctor. You go back to your room and rest first. You two maidservants, go find some ginger sugar water. You stayed out all night last night, it would be good if you did not catch a cold." Everyone stared at the two with an expression that said, "There is definitely something wrong." However, the two of them were calm and collected. Xiao Xiao nodded, "Yes. This is retribution for one's evil deeds." Lu Zhu returned after putting away the medicine and said, "I heard that second young master was leisurely sipping tea in the carriage that day. In the end, when the soldiers came to search, his face turned green." After saying this, she felt that it was funny and burst out laughing. "Miss, we servants did a good job, right?" Lu Zhu giggled and said, "Let Yan Hua Yuan worry about it on their own. Miss was frightened last night. Today, you must eat something to nourish your body. What kind of medicinal cuisine should you make?" Jiang Ruan glanced at the gossipy expressions on everyone's faces and sighed in her heart. Jiang Xing stared at Jiang Ruan, dumbfounded. After a moment, a trace of grief flashed across his face. He looked at Xiao Xiao as if he was an enemy. Yi Feng, Guan Lianghan and the others all had martial arts, and their hearing was extraordinarily good. Since the matter she wanted to say needed to be avoided from the crowd, it could not be heard by others. Xiao Xiao thought of this and was very considerate. Yi Feng breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, only to hear Xiao Xiao say, "Your position will temporarily be replaced by Genie." As he thought this, a third-rank servant girl timidly knocked on the door. Jiang Ruan motioned for her to come in. The servant girl said, "Miss, Lin Lang Jijia, who serves Furen, wants you to go to Yan Hua Yuan." The atmosphere became strangely strange. Jiang Xing pulled Jiang Ruan back a step and said, "Your Highness, General, Ruan was frightened and injured. Xing will first take her back to the Fu for treatment. As for the rest of the matter, after escorting my younger sister back to the Fu, Xing will come to see General." Xiao Xiao shook his head. Jiang Xing turned around and began to size up Jiang Ruan. Seeing that she was in a sorry state and her clothes were bleeding, his face turned cold and he said, "Ruan, are you injured?" The entire family of the Prime Minister's Fu conspired to rebel. In this life, they have already committed an unforgivable crime and are bound to die. I want Xiao Wangye to protect their lives and hand over Li Dong and his two sons to me. If we can't sacrifice the child, we can't trap the wolf. Right now, Chao Er's life is the most important. Xia Yan gritted her teeth. She smiled at Xiao Xiao and said, "Many thanks, Your Highness." When Baiji heard this, she smiled and said, "The sky has turned upside down." When second young lady came back yesterday, her face was covered with blood, as if the carriage had turned over and fell into the thorns. It took a long time for the soldiers to find her. The doctor said that it might leave a scar. This time, it was Jiang Ruan's turn to be astonished. Rumors had it that Jinying Wang was cold and heartless, but now that she saw him, his temperament was surprisingly good. She frowned slightly. Did he really value the debt of saving his life so much? She spoke quickly and steadily, almost without thinking about it. Obviously, she had hidden these words in her heart for a long time. Jiang Ruan raised her head to look at him. Coincidentally, the sun had just risen in the mountain forest, and the warm golden rays of the sun made his face look even more handsome. His pitch-black eyes were like sparkling gems, elegant and noble. The third-rank servant girl stared blankly and repeatedly shook her head. This servant does not dare to lie. He lowered his head and his gaze fell on the bright jade butterfly pendant on the table. Jiang Ruan stared at him. Xiao Wangye wants to return this favor. Xiao Xiao said indifferently, "Go to 100 Zhonglu to receive your punishment." "Yes." Xiao Xiao answered. Xiao Xiao looked at her seriously, but did not ask why. He nodded and said, "Okay." Delayed the timing. Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows. The people who had searched yesterday were the Guan and Zhao family armies. Needless to say about the Zhao family, the Guan family army had also obeyed Jiang Xing's orders. Could it be that this was deliberate? Naturally, she would not feel any sympathy for Jiang Su. She heard Baiji continue, "This is still nothing, but that second young master is a complete idiot." That day, he was sitting alone in the carriage and was safe and sound, but he was arrested as an accomplice of the rebels. At this moment, Yan Huayuan is in a complete mess, thinking about how to rescue second young master. At that time, she was extremely exhausted and did not have time to ponder the meaning behind Xiao Xiao's words before she fell into a deep sleep. This morning, before she could ask for an answer, she saw Jiang Xing. Jiang Ruan and Jiang Xing were siblings, so naturally, she understood what Jiang Xing was thinking. For a moment, she was helpless. Finished speaking, she did not care what else the servant girl had to say. She pushed the servant girl out of the room and neatly closed the door. Xiao Wangye helped second younger sister because he thought she was me? She asked. Jiang Xing dismounted from his horse and walked quickly to Jiang Ruan. Without batting an eyelid, he pulled Jiang Ruan behind him to block Xiao Xiao. Baiji glared at him and imitated Lien Qiao's usual shrewish manner, "Are you all blind? Can't you see that Miss has just escaped from death, and is injured and very weak? I'm afraid that you won't even have the strength to walk and is waiting for the doctor to come and treat you. Furen is compassionate, how could she not be considerate to Miss? It must be you, this dead hussy, who is talking nonsense." Indeed, he was a complete idiot. But she was really unwilling to let this matter settle like this. This was a rare opportunity. Although she did not know much about Xiao Xiao, she knew that in her previous life, this person had a firm heart and would do what he said. In some ways, he was a rare true man. Moreover, Xiao Xiao had a wide network and great power. With him stepping forward, there was a 70% chance of success. But Jiang Ruan also knew that it was impossible to convict Jiang Chao of colluding with rebels based on this point. As long as there was no conclusive evidence, no one would be able to convict Jiang Chao. Although the crime did not warrant the death penalty, it would not be easy to escape from that man-eating prison. Furen is thinking. Li Momo asked. Mistaking Xiao Xiao's savior and mistaking the enemy of Xiao Xiao's savior as his savior, even if Yifeng had 10 lives, it would not be enough for him to die. He was not afraid of death, but he was afraid that Xiao Xiao would not allow him to follow by his side. He could not help but feel somewhat discouraged. Who would have thought that Jiang Wan would disguise herself as a maidservant and blend in with the procession that night? Coincidentally, she had told the public that only the second Jiang Miss had gone to offer incense. Guan Lianghan looked at Jiang Wan meaningfully and then looked at Xiao Xiao. Suddenly, a mischievous smile appeared on his face. Pretending, and still pretending that nothing had happened, there was definitely a problem. She did not want to have anything to do with this person, and it would be best if they were strangers. However, there were some things that she had no choice but to borrow his hand, which would cause misunderstandings. Jiang Xing was different from Guan Lianghan. He had little contact with Xiao Xiao, and when he left the capital 5 years ago, he knew nothing about the capital. Now that Jiang Wan was his most beloved sister, he immediately looked at Xiao Xiao as if he was looking at a lecher. He pulled Jiang Wan back, not letting her continue forward, and said stiffly, "On behalf of my sister, Xing thanks your highness for saving my life." Slut! Xia Yan clenched her fists tightly. This matter was of great importance, and Xia Cheng would not recklessly wade into these muddy waters to protect himself. What should she do? After struggling for a while, she finally made up her mind and said, "Go get the key to my storeroom." Bai Ji and Lian Qiao hurriedly complied and helped Jiang Wan back to her room. When they returned to the courtyard, they lay down on the couch. Bai Ji went to look for ginger sugar water, and Lu Zhu helped Jiang Wan change into a clean set of clothes. Jiang Wan asked, "How is Lian Qiao?" Xiao Xiao stared at her and could hear the businesslike tone in her words. He asked, "What do you want to do?" This time, Jiang Wan was a little surprised. She put down the bowl and said, "I was actually caught." Yi Feng hung his head dejectedly and went out. Just as he stepped out, he saw housekeeper Lin, who was leaning against the door and eavesdropping. He looked at him with sympathy and said, "Feng, how did you make His Highness angry?" "Hey, wait, don't walk too fast. Tell me what happened between His Highness and the Jiang family's miss last night. Why did you jump down to save her?" Chapter 95. The rain that had been raining for several months finally stopped. The next day, the sun shone brightly. The common people spread the news, saying that the heavens were looking out for the great Jin dynasty, preventing this undeserved disaster from spreading. Li Yang's matter was only a prelude. What she wanted to deal with was clearly the entire Prime Minister's fu. However, Li Dong, Lian, and even himself had unknowingly walked into the ending that Jiang Wan had planned for them. Jiang Wan had calculated everything. He even had the absurd illusion that Jiang Wan had long known about the Scarlet Thunder Army and his physical defects, but had carefully arranged a play for them. The Scarlet Thunder Army, these two trump cards, were the final weapons that she would use to make them collapse. Lian stared at her, his gaze not as calm as it had been at the beginning. He wanted to curse loudly, but the drug made his body weak and weak, making it impossible for him to raise his voice. He said, "Slut." "Wrong." Jiang Wan looked at him, her smile still gentle and sweet. "I have never competed with second young master Li. I only wanted to destroy the Prime Minister's fu, and second young master, you did not defend it." In the innermost cell of the dungeon, 3 prisoners dressed in prison uniforms sat on the hay. Although the 3 of them were in a sorry state, they looked like nobles who had lived like princes. Every move they made carried an air of arrogance and bossiness. It was Li Dong, his father, and his son. Li Dong had a big belly, and his snow-white prison uniform was so dirty that its original color could no longer be seen. He looked extremely anxious and shouted at Lian, "This is all you're doing, quickly think of a way." Lian was stunned. Jiang Ruan's words were inexplicable, but he also had a feeling that it was absurd, as if what Jiang Wan said was true. He stared at Jiang Wan motionlessly, and suddenly smiled bitterly, "If I bet, I must accept defeat. I have lost. How could there be such a person in this world?" No matter how clever Lian was, he could not think of where he was. He looked at Li Yang and Li Dong lying on the bed, unconscious. His heart tightened, and he knew that he had fallen into a trap. What was her purpose in doing this? She had dealt with the Prime Minister's Fu so ruthlessly, which meant that she had already formed a feud with the Prime Minister's Fu. However, he had sent people to investigate before, and there was no reason at all. The sound of footsteps slowly approaching could be heard from outside. The corner of the crabapple-colored skirt was a warm color. Looking up the delicate skirt, he could see a graceful figure, a charming face, a gentle smile, but a gaze as cold as a knife. Li An's gaze was heavy as he looked at her, only to hear Jiang Wan softly and gently explain, "This is a small brothel, not an ordinary brothel. The waiters here are specially made for those low-level slaves who sell hard labor." After saying that, he didn't say anything else. He raised his hand and chopped at the back of Li Dong and Li Yang's neck. Li Dong and Li Yang instantly fell to the ground. Seeing this, Lian knew that something was wrong. Before he could react, he felt a chill on the back of his neck. His mind went blank and he lost consciousness. It was impossible to escape. The young girl in front of him was not human, but a devil. She was a poppy that grew from the depths of hell. She looked beautiful and moving, but as soon as she approached, she would use her blood-stained vines to entangle the person and drag them into hell together. She sighed softly and said, "It's probably because in my previous life, the Prime Minister's Fu owed me a huge debt of life." Jean Yi turned a blind eye to the brothel madam's coquettish actions. He took out a banknote from his clothes and said, "This is silver." He leaned back and couldn't help but feel anger and fear. In his life, he could get whatever he wanted, and there was nothing he couldn't accomplish. Now, he was thrown in jail and would end up with his head chopped off. Li Dong had always been afraid of death. At this moment, he was even more unwilling and wanted to fight for a way out. The only person he could rely on was Lian. Lian was extremely intelligent and could naturally think of a good way to escape. But this time, Lian disappointed him. Li Yang looked at Lian beside him and sneered. He had always known that Lian was intelligent, and his mind was even more profound. He was afraid of his intelligence. But Lian was also a naturally impotent person. His heart was full of contempt for Lian. Now that death was at hand, he didn't care and revealed his disgust towards Lian, a monster who can't do anything right. "What do you mean?" After a long while, he squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Li An's eyes seemed to be bloodshot. He had faced countless opponents in his life, and he could defeat them effortlessly. But he had never met someone like Jiang Ruan. Her every move seemed to be a terror that had long been calculated. Even in the end, she clearly understood what his true weakness was. Death was not frightening, what was frightening was living a life worse than death. Moreover, this kind of life had no end. Among such people, it was often difficult for a man to escape from his wife. One of them said coldly, "It's just something to tell you to keep your voice down." This place was used to lock up criminals who had committed grave crimes. Once they entered this place, they would never have the chance to turn things around. On the contrary, the Guan family army and the Zhao family army, who had led the officers and soldiers to capture the rebel army, received unanimous praise. Especially the two juniors, Zhao Yi and Jiang Xing. Because of this flood, their reputation rose very quickly, almost to the point where everyone knew them. Li An's heart tightened. He had always been intelligent and conceited. At this moment, he could gradually understand Jiang Ruan's schemes. But there was still one thing that even now, he couldn't understand. Jiang Ruan quietly looked at him. That pair of bewitching eyes, that gentle and charming smile, suddenly disappeared. For the first time, she did not conceal her hatred towards him. Just like a calm sea that had turned into a stormy sea, there was only a turbulent blackness. However, that blackness also contained a blood hatred, a blood feud that could not be reconciled under the same sky. Needless to say, the women in the brothels of the Road of Spiritual Awakening were different from the women in the brothels of the capital. They received customers all day long, and the mothers of the brothels treated these women extremely harshly. On normal days, they could only get a meal to eat. If they were sick, they had to receive customers because they were sick. If they could not stand the sickness, they would be covered with a mat and thrown into a mass grave, where their bodies would be eaten clean by wolves. This was a common occurrence. Throughout his life, the Prime Minister can summon the wind and summon the rain. Moreover, he views human lives as insignificant as ants. The number of lowly commoners who have died in his hands is innumerable. Eldest young master and second young master are the same. If there comes a day when they have no choice but to struggle and cry under the bodies of your so-called lowly commoners, I wonder if the taste would be even better. However, in contrast to the joy of the common people of the capital, the dungeon was gloomy and damp. The jailer who guarded the door ferociously circled the dungeon a few times with a knife in his hand, turning a deaf ear to the moans of the prisoners in the dungeon. When the mother saw the banknotes, she was so happy that her teeth could not see her eyes. She smiled and said, "Ye trusts this servant, then give this person to this servant." Although he is somewhat old, fortunately, his body is still tender. There are people here who like exciting things, so they turned off the lights in the room. This way, it will be more fun. If this person does not look at the face, after a few rounds of body training, he will naturally succeed. The Road of Spiritual Awakening was a place that the poor people of the capital frequented. Jiang Yuan stood upright in the room. The young girl's beautiful face was cold and beautiful, containing a kind of fear that would cause one's heart to tremble. Her hands were folded in her sleeves, folded flat in front of her chest. Her dignified and elegant posture seemed to be demanding a life. The clothes of the people on the ground were disheveled. The two people in front were roughly youths. Although their hair was disheveled, their faces were of the highest quality with delicate skin and tender flesh. In this small tavern, they were enough to be considered as the top card. However, the person behind the two people looked like a middle-aged man of 40 or 50 years old. Moreover, he was born with a pot-bellied belly. It was really too unappetizing. It was not that she did not want to make a move, but once she made a move, it would cause the other party to lose the entire game. Lian closely watched the movements of the two people, and a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes. At this moment, the person who had come to rescue them was the 8th prince, Xian Li. However, this person, Xian Li, appeared to be gentle on the surface, but in reality, his heart was cold and indifferent. If it was beneficial to him, he would naturally entertain them attentively, but if it was useless, he could only be reduced to an abandoned son. Currently, the charge that the Grand Chancellor's Fu had incurred was that they intended to rebel. They were a thorn in the Emperor's side. As long as they had the slightest connection with the Grand Chancellor's Fu, they would become the Emperor's enemy in the future. Based on Xian Li's temperament, he would only sacrifice the rook to protect the general. How could he possibly find someone to rescue them? Eldest Jiang Miss, it really is you. Lian sneered. She was speaking so carelessly about these inverted yin and yang matters, causing Jin Yi to feel somewhat uncomfortable. Thus, he said, these three people need to be properly trained. Lady Boss, please put in more effort. Li An's originally disdainful expression changed abruptly upon hearing Jiang Ruan's words, and his body could not help but stiffen. Li An turned a deaf ear, but in his mind, the faint smile of a young girl appeared. Her words were still ringing in his ears, and each sentence was a curse that led people to fall into the abyss. The flood had destroyed the houses and farmlands. Since the sun had risen, the people in the city, old and young, were busy repairing the houses and restoring the damaged shops. Even so, there was still a hint of joy on their faces. After all, there was still a chance to start over. 103 people against 103 people. The debt from the previous life was just right. The front door was deserted, and there were few carriages and horses. There was no longer the bustling scene of the past bustling with people. The ground was piled with rubbish and debris from the flood. Looking at it, one could only feel that it was dirty and messy. Occasionally, people would pass by and take a look, but it was difficult to conceal the contempt in their eyes. As his thoughts gradually cleared up in the prison, Lian carefully sorted out the matter. Finally, he gradually saw some clues. As early as the first time Li Yang had gone to the Jiang Fu and encountered Jiang Su Su being castrated, he had already fallen into Jiang Ruan's trap. Genie shook off the goosebumps on his body and said, "Many thanks." Being stared at by such a pair of eyes, Lian actually felt a fierce chill run down his spine. He suddenly felt that going against the young girl in front of him was the most foolish decision he had ever made in his life. Occasionally, there would be one or two of those lowly commoners with unusual tastes. Women's bodies were weak and could not help but be tormented. The youths in the little brothel were different from those in the capital. They were not the kind of delicate, fair-skinned youths. Most of them came from poor families, and it was difficult for them to earn some money by doing hard labor, so they sold their bodies here. These youths' bodies were strong and healthy, and their appearance was not the most important thing. However, even such robust youths would often be tormented to death. He had long had this intuition, and the moment he saw Jiang Ruan, he could not clearly describe what exactly he felt in his heart. Was it anger and unwillingness, or was it gnashing his teeth, or was it the indifference of being inferior and conceding defeat? Li Yang and Li Dong stared blankly. That person had already done the same thing to Lian, and Lian had also been forced to swallow one of those pills. Lian slowly raised his head and looked her in the eye, saying, "Why do you want to deal with the Prime Minister Fu? To think that a girl in the boudoir like her could think of such a method." He was not afraid of death, nor was he afraid of other forms of torture, but to make him do those filthy things under the bodies of the lowly commoners, Lian felt a chill run down his spine whenever he thought about it. He wanted to vomit. His heart was extremely panicked, and he did his utmost to find a way to escape. However, when he saw the young girl's slightly mocking gaze, a kind of despair grew in his heart. On this day, the small brothel in the path of spiritual enchantment received another business. When his mother saw the three people, a smile surfaced on her face as she looked at the first two, but the last one frowned. She pointed at her short, thick fingers that were covered in nail polish, and threw a coquettish glance at the man opposite her. "Yi, what do you mean by this? The first two were indeed good goods, but this one? Could it be that you are toying with this slave?" Jiang Ruan looked at him with great interest, and said with a smile, "So second young master Li is also afraid. I originally thought that there was nothing in this world that could baffle second young master, so why have you been repeatedly defeated by my hands?" Therefore, the brothel and small brothel in the path of spiritual enchantment had the most prosperous business. Just as he was thinking, he heard the door open with a creak, and a person leisurely walked in. Moreover, the small brothel in the path of spiritual enchantment was different from the brothel. Li Dong sensed something and looked suspiciously at the black-clothed people. "What do you want?" Without saying a word, the two black-clothed people walked to the door of the prison cell. Who knew where they had obtained two keys, and without batting an eyelid, they began to open the cell door. The rebel army had been quelled, and the flood had also been quelled. The capital had regained its former tranquility, and there was a bit of stability after surviving a calamity. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. "Second young master is indeed different from ordinary people. Eldest young master and the Prime Minister have yet to wake up, but second young master has already woken up." She paused, but waking up now may not be a good thing. At the corner of the busiest street in the capital, the Prime Minister's manor, which used to be resplendent in gold and jade, was now covered with a faint layer of dust. The vermilion-red door seemed to have peeled off overnight, and it no longer had its former luster. Two seals were pasted on the dragon's head lock, and it was a ghastly sight to behold. Lian was still immersed in his own thoughts, and did not notice that the jailer in the dungeon had disappeared at some point. Li Dong was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. He had said everything he could in the court, but unfortunately, the emperor had steeled his heart to deal with him this time. If it had been in the past, he would have just had to fork out some money, but this time, no one dared to accept his money. In fact, the prime minister's manor had already been confiscated, and the beautiful concubine, who had long since heard the news, had swept away the rest of the property in the house. Now, there was nothing left. Before he could ask the question in his heart, Li Dong and Li Yang had already stood up and looked at the two black-clothed people with burning gazes. After the two black-clothed people opened the cell door, one of them suddenly stepped forward and clamped down on Li Dong and Li Yang with one hand, while the other person raised his hand and threw something into Li Yang and Li Dong's mouth. She said indifferently, "Yesterday, all 103 people in the Prime Minister's manor were beheaded at the Meridian Gate. His Majesty was furious, and his 9 clans were exterminated. This place was adjacent to the place where the most hard-working people lived, and the lowly commoners often came and went. These people usually had low status and were penniless. They usually relied on selling hard labor to survive, and their lives were extremely difficult." Jiang Wuan said, "Second young master, why don't you take a look at this place?" When Lian woke up, Li Yang and Li Dong were still unconscious. Lian had practiced martial arts on a daily basis, so he had a slight foundation. When he tried to circulate his internal energy, he found that his entire body was limp and powerless. Doing this for no reason at all. Was it possible? The mother of the small brothel shop had been in this line of work for many years, so naturally, she was not a good person. When she heard Jin Yi's words, she somewhat understood. She only thought that some big family had some enmity, and she was only responsible for collecting money and doing things. Seeing that the person in front of her did not seem to be from an ordinary family, she smiled and said, "Does this master not trust this servant's thoughts? Rest assured, since this is the case, I will arrange for them to receive the guests today." She looked at Jin Yi, and the handkerchief in her hand was almost thrown at Jin Yi's face. She said in a sweet voice, "Does this master want to see it with his own eyes?" "What do you want to do?" Lian asked. He scanned the surroundings, but did not see the jailer's figure. Li Dong and Li Yang, on the other hand, noticed the two black-clothed people at a glance. They were pleasantly surprised and said, "Warrior, are you here to rescue us?" Lian did not move at all. His eyes were closed, as if he did not hear what he said at all. Privately recuperating and plotting a rebellion, not to mention the royal family, even in the hearts of the common people, this was an unpardonable evil deed. Moreover, Li Dong usually covered the sky with one hand, and the common people had long hated him to the bone. Now that they saw him in trouble, the hatred in their hearts was naturally alleviated. Only scolding the wicked would have their own wicked torment. Her words were meant to kill, but she did not stop there. She continued to smile and said, "I think that second young master has always wanted to be first in everything in his life, but this time, the Grand Chancellor's fu has collapsed. Second young master will never have the chance to taste first place again in this lifetime. Therefore, Wan Yang has the heart to help second young master." She laughed in an extremely carefree manner. "I see that the three of you, father and son, are quite good-looking. From today onwards, the three of you, father and son, will receive the guests together. I wonder if second young master will be able to be the first." He was stunned for a moment. He narrowed his eyes, and the scene before him gradually became clear. Lian looked around and saw that he was in a room that was not very big. The inside of the room emitted a strange fragrance, like the fragrance of a woman's cosmetics, but it also contained an indescribable substance. The decorations in the room were cheap and somewhat gaudy. At this moment, he was sitting on a square bed. On the bed hung a peach-pink cigarette curtain. It looked like a woman's boudoir, but at the same time, it did not seem like a woman's boudoir. That is, why did Jiang Wuan do this? When he felt that his surroundings were excessively quiet, and a strange intuition reminded him, Lian suddenly opened his eyes. He saw two masked people dressed in black gradually walking over from the darkness. Since the other party dared to kidnap them from the heavenly prison, he knew that they had something to rely on. However, he did not know where this place was, and what were their intentions. Chapter 96. In the dimly lit room, a few lanterns were lit for no reason. The bright pink lanterns were made of poor quality cloth, and the incense in the room gave off a nauseating smell. The incense curled in the air, and the more one breathed in, the more it made one's heart feel hot, as if something was scratching at one's chest. The door was kicked open with a bang, and 3 burly middle-aged men walked in from the outside. The 3 of them had dark skin and dirty clothes. One look and one could tell that they were slaves who worked as laborers. As soon as they walked in, the 3 men's eyes fell on the 3 people in the room. The 2 young men lying on the bed had fair skin, and under the dim light, they looked handsome. Although their bodies were slender, their skin was soft and tender. The leader's eyes lit up, and he praised. Lu Sanyang said that a few good people came today, and she was right. He strode over and touched Li Yang's face, then looked down at the other person, and frowned. What's wrong with this person? Is Lu Sanyang playing with us? Li Dong's face was pale, and his heart was filled with anger and fear. He had played with countless boys in his life, and naturally knew what kind of place this was. But who would have thought that today, he would be at the mercy of others in a place like this? It was unbelievable. Although he was furious, his body was too weak to move, and the words he spoke were weak and powerless. The other middle-aged man smiled, and his face was filled with lust. Who cares, it's all the same if the light is turned off. Although he's a little old, he's still young. The 3 of us brothers will have a good time tonight. Lu Sanyang asked us for 1 tael of silver, and we paid a lot of money today. We must have some fun. Li Yang looked at the 3 people in fear. The man in the lead narrowed his eyes and looked at him. He reached his hand into Li Yang's clothes. The room was lit with aphrodisiac incense, and the man was like dry firewood and a raging fire. Now that he was up close, Li Yang's handsome face was filled with fear, and he immediately had that thought. Without saying a word, he pulled Li Yang's clothes. Li Dong closed his eyes in pain. Even if Li Yang was a playboy, he was still his son. At this moment, he was going to be humiliated by these lowly peasants. The other 2 were already eager to give it a try. They walked to Li Yan's side. Li Yan's body was unable to move, so he glared fiercely at the 2 men. His gaze was sinister, causing the 2 men to be startled. When they came back to their senses, they couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. One of them slapped Li Yan's face, causing him to stagger. The other impatiently tore open his clothes and pants. He was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly burst into laughter and said, "It's actually a natural castrated body." As he said this, he stroked it. "Since you have a naturally castrated body, your body should be below. Why don't you let us brothers teach you so that you can understand what is going on?" A palm print appeared on Li Yan's pale face. His fierce expression only made people feel even more tyrannical. His face started to turn red. Lu Sanyang had given the 3 of them the strongest medicine they had. They had to have sex with other people constantly, or else their bodies would not be able to bear it. For example, although he was glaring angrily at others, his body was no longer listening to him. The 2 men looked at each other, and without another word, they swarmed over him. Stifled groans and thought-provoking screams resounded in the room. Not knowing how much time had passed, Li Yan and Li Yang had become unrecognizable. The 3 men had come in a menacing manner, and their bodies were strong and healthy. They had tortured them to the point where they didn't even look human. The 2 of them lay on the ground, their bodies covered in filth. The 3 men looked at each other, then at Li Dong, who was shivering on the bed. With a wave of their hands, the lights went out, and the 3 of them swarmed over him again. Outside the room, Jian Wan stood quietly in front of the door. Listening to the sounds of pain, her expression was incomparably indifferent. What floated in her mind was the last moments of her past life, the young boy's frightened eyes, and Li Dong's ugly face as he laughed. With her own eyes, she had seen Pei Er, whom she had regarded as her own son, being toyed to death by Tuesday. She couldn't speak, and her body couldn't move. She could only watch helplessly. Using her tears and blood, she swore that in this life, she would let Li Dong have a taste of this. She had thought that after such a long time, at this moment, her heart would only feel carefree. She had thought that her love and hatred had been well concealed, and would not easily rush out from the bottom of her heart. Only now, listening to the screams of Li Dong and his sons, did she understand that the hatred had always been hidden in the bottom of her heart. Moreover, it was far from enough. It was far from enough. If the Prime Minister's Fu fell, who would be next? Not far behind her, Xiao Xiao looked at her back. When he heard that she was going to send Li Dong and his sons to the brothel, he was slightly surprised. At this moment, he saw that her expression was ice-cold and her eyes were dark. He didn't know what she was thinking, but it seemed like she was brewing a storm of emotions. Although she tried her best to conceal it, her hands were clenched into fists. Only hatred could cause people to be like this. After a long time, Jiang Wan slowly turned around. Seeing that he was still there, she was also stunned. However, she quickly recovered and walked up to him, saying, "Many thanks, Xiao Wanye." Xiao Xiao looked at her thoughtfully, "No need. I owe you a life, so I will help you." Jiang Wan smiled slightly, "Then I ask Xiao Wanye to send people to take good care of this brothel, and be sure to take good care of the Prime Minister's family." Xiao Xiao was flabbergasted. She was an unmarried woman, but she was very knowledgeable about these things. She even knew about the brothel in the path of spiritual awakening. Who would teach a young lady these things? Moreover, even if she knew, she still stood at the door and listened without a trace of embarrassment. She was so magnanimous that it made people click their tongues in wonder. He nodded, "All right." After thinking for a while, he took out an object from his bosom and handed it to Jiang Wan. It was a very beautiful bracelet that emitted a faint blue light. It was engraved with small and complicated patterns, but it didn't seem complicated. It had a meaning of its own. This bracelet looked very familiar. Jiang Wan glanced at it and was startled. Blood Moon bracelet. She and Zhao Jin had gone to the newly opened jewelry building in the capital. On the second floor, where weapons and treasures were sold, she had taken a fancy to this bracelet. However, she didn't have enough money to buy it. That bracelet looked good, but in reality, it was an exquisite hidden weapon. By pressing a mechanism, it could shoot out a silver poison needle. This needle could also be used repeatedly. It was truly a treasure. She raised her head to look at Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao's pitch-black eyes were cold and serene as he said, "If there is danger, you can use it." Jiang Wan hesitated. The Blood Moon bracelet was indeed a rare treasure, and it was exactly what she needed. However, Xiao Xiao had just expressed that he was on her side. Was he trustworthy? However, her love for the bracelet temporarily overcame the doubts in her heart. She took the bracelet and smiled at Xiao Xiao, "Many thanks to your highness." Xiao Xiao pursed his lips, turned around, and walked in front of her, one behind the other. He reminded her, "Jiang Chao has already been released from prison." Jiang Wan thought for a moment, "I know." She had never thought that she could defeat Jiang Chao in one blow. Without concrete evidence, Jiang Chao would at most arouse suspicion. Xia Yan would certainly do everything possible to rescue Jiang Chao from prison. However, Jiang Chao might have to pay a price. Needless to say, just his reputation alone would make it impossible for Jiang Chao to raise his head again in this lifetime. Who would look favorably upon a person who had been in prison? As for Xia Yan, the price she had to pay might not be so simple. In short, these two people had suffered a double loss this time. Thinking about it made one feel a little happy. So be it, one at a time. Debts owed should be paid, and lives should be exchanged for lives. This was a matter of course. In the Jiang Fu's Yan Hua Yuan, Xia Yan's lips trembled as she looked at Jiang Chao in front of her. Jiang Chao's complexion was pale, and his entire person seemed to have sunk into extreme fear. His cheeks were deeply sunken, his eyes were lifeless, his hair was stained with a lot of filth, and his entire body emitted a nauseating stench. However, after a few short days in prison, it was as if he had changed into a completely different person. There was no trace of the elegant young master of the past. The physician had already come to take a look and said that Jiang Chao's lower body had been torn, and he had also suffered a shock. He needed to stay in the Fu to recuperate. Although the physician's words were extremely vague, in Xia Yan's ears, it was like she had been struck by lightning. Jiang Chao had been humiliated in prison. She looked at Jiang Chao in disbelief. Jiang Chao's entire body had shrunk into a ball, and he curled up in a corner of the room. His entire body trembled as he muttered, "Don't. Xia Yan finally could not bear it any longer. She pulled him into her embrace and screamed, "Chao, Jiang Chao pushed her with all his might, his eyes filled with fear. He bit her frantically, "Go away, go away." Xia Yan was caught off guard and was bitten on the hand. The bite was extremely deep, and blood immediately gushed out like a fountain. Lin Lang was shocked into a daze and hurriedly came over to help. "Furen, how are you?" Xia Yan pushed Lin Lang away with one hand and hugged Jiang Chao without a care. Crying, she said, "My Chao, open your eyes and look clearly. I am your mother, I am your mother." Her embrace was too tight, and Jiang Chao could not break free. Gradually, he calmed down in Xia Yan's embrace. In a trembling voice, he said, "Mother. It's me, I am your mother." Xia Yan could not control her pain. "Chao, who did this to you?" Jiang Chao's entire body trembled. He grabbed Xia Yan's sleeve and repeatedly said one sentence, "Mother, save me, save me, save me." Those unbearable images flashed through his mind. That prison was not a place for people to stay. Those prisoners were all vicious and wicked people. He did not know who had ordered the jailers to lock him up with those people. Those people were extremely vile and did not differentiate between men and women. They wanted to forcibly humiliate him. In the few short days he had been in prison, he had been tortured to the point that he did not even look human. Thinking of this, Jiang Chao felt a wave of acid rise up in his stomach. With a "wah" sound, he vomited all over Xia Yan's head and face. The few servant girls in the room were shocked and hurried over to help. Xia Yan only felt dizzy and had someone take Jiang Chao back first. Only after Jiang Chao had fallen asleep with great difficulty did Xia Yan go to change her clothes. Her entire person seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. She no longer had the gentle and beautiful appearance from before. At this moment, her hands were pressed against her forehead, and she looked like an old middle-aged woman. Lin Lang worriedly said, "Furen, how dare she treat Chao, like this?" Thinking of Jiang Chao, Xia Yan's heart ached. "I must make that slut pay back 1,000 times over." She knew that this matter should be blamed on Lian, but Lian was already in prison. She pushed all the blame onto Jiang Ruan. If not for her, Jiang Chao would not have ended up like this. "Furen, the money over there has been settled. The account book in the storeroom still needs to be amended," Lin Lang reminded her. At the mention of this matter, Xia Yan's chest felt stifled. At that time, after Jiang Chao's incident at Baihua Lu, she had spent almost all of her money. Even her own dowry had been lost. Now that he had rescued Jiang Chao from the prison, he had spent quite a sum of money to get things done. The remainder of her dowry would be left for Jiang Su as her dowry in the future. Now that there was not much money left in the public purse, she had set her sights on old Jiang Madam's dowry. Old Jiang Madam was originally the daughter of a noble family. Her dowry was very generous, but because it would be left for Jiang Quan in the future, Xia Yan did not have any other thoughts. However, a few days ago, Jiang Chao had met with a mishap. In his anger, Jiang Quan had ignored it, so she could only ask old Jiang Madam for help. Old Jiang Madam refused without hesitation. In the past, she could still ask Xia Cheng for help, but in recent times, Xia Cheng and the Jiang family already had many grievances. Xia Yan had no choice. Old Jiang Madam's money was in her hands and she could not get it, but the estates and fields under her name were dead. Xia Yan had sold those shops and fields behind everyone's back in exchange for money to rescue Jiang Chao. Now that Jiang Chao had returned, she still had to think of a way to clear up the accounts. Xia Yan felt dizzy and her vision blurred. She had always appeared indifferent to worldly affairs, but in reality, she was incomparably astute. However, with all these things coming at her at once, she had no idea what to do. She shook her head and said to Lin Lang, "Help me take a walk in the courtyard." Lin Lang obeyed and helped her to the entrance of the courtyard. Just then, she saw Jiang Wan and Lian Xiao pass by. When Jiang Wan saw Xia Yan, she stopped and greeted her, "Mother." Xia Yan forced a smile and nodded. She was not in the mood to put on a show of motherly love and filial piety, and her eyes did not conceal the hatred. Jiang Wan took a step back and smiled, "Why does mother have such a smell on you? Let's go back and clean it up first. Wan Yang will return to the courtyard." After saying this, she left with Lian Xiao. Xia Yan watched Jiang Ruan's departing figure and thought of Jiang Chao's sorry state of vomiting all over her. She almost ground her teeth to pieces. Jiang Xing first went to Jiang Ruan's courtyard when he returned. Jiang Ruan was instructing Lian Xiao, Baiji and the others to change the clothes that had been damp for the past few days. Seeing Jiang Xing enter, Lian Xiao hurriedly went to make a cup of tea. Jiang Ruan sat opposite him. Jiang Xing paused, then went straight to the point. Ruan, Li Dong and his sons died in prison yesterday. Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows slightly. "Oh. The jailer found them this morning. They were said to have committed suicide to escape punishment. His Majesty was furious and wanted to dismember their corpses." At this point, Jiang Xing angrily said, "This is called reincarnation. It's not that retribution has not come, but that the time has not yet come. They wanted to marry you off, but they didn't want to be fated to do so." Jiang Ruan had a faint smile on her face, but she pondered in her heart. Li Dong and his sons committing suicide to escape punishment should be Xiao Xiao's doing. Although she did not know what method he had used, even Jiang Xing had not discovered anything amiss. Naturally, it should have been flawless. She lowered her head and smiled faintly, but in Jiang Xing's eyes, his heart was moved. He softened his voice and said, "In a few days, His Majesty will hold a palace banquet to reward the ministers who have rendered meritorious service in controlling the floods. At that time, I will also go. You, as a family member, will also go. At that time, eldest brother will help you plan a good future." Jiang Wan naturally understood what he meant by these words. Jiang Xing wanted to use his meritorious service to change her identity, or an opportunity to elevate her status, so that the Jiang family would not dare to easily bully her. Jiang Xing said, "Nowadays, the greater my meritorious service, the more His Majesty will value me. The West is not very peaceful, and it is inevitable that one day he will lead troops into battle. If you have protection, it will be extremely good." "Protection?" Jiang Wan smiled slightly. "How does older brother want to protect me? Change the identity of a Junju? Older brother, do not forget that thunder, rain, and dew are the benevolence of the ruler. Now that His Majesty values older brother, this is an opportunity for older brother. However, if older brother rashly guesses the Emperor's heart, and even uses this kind of bartering attitude, I am afraid that His Majesty will not be pleased. As for the identity of a Junju, I am not saying this on purpose, but for the time being, older brother's meritorious service is not enough. Jiang Xing was speechless. He understood that what Jiang Yuan said was right. However, riches and honor were like fleeting clouds to him. Now, he only hoped that Jiang Yuan could live a good life. However, what kind of place was the Jiangfu? These days, Jiang Xing had clearly seen the faces of these people. He only felt apprehensive for Jiang Yuan's past life. In the future, when he went into battle, how could he feel at ease leaving Jiang Yuan in such a dangerous place? Jiang Yuan looked at him, smiled, and said, "If I don't change the identity of a Junju, there is actually another way to protect me." "What is it?" Jiang Xing asked. "It's very simple. Find a person with great power to be engaged to me. Once there is an engagement, I will only be half a member of the Jiang family. If that person's power is great, the people here will not dare to make things difficult for me." When Jiang Xing heard this, he did not even think about it and refused, "That won't do. You are still so young, how can you be in such a hurry to find someone to be engaged to?" He looked at Jiang Yuan's generous attitude without the slightest bit of bashfulness, and was even more certain that Jiang Yuan did not understand what an engagement was. He said, "Moreover, the Jiang family and the Xia family are on good terms, and the Xia family and the 8th prince are on good terms. How can it be so easy to find someone who can contend with the 8th prince?" At this point, he seemed to have thought of something, and suddenly froze, not speaking for a long time. Jiang Yuan looked at him, "Older brother?" Jiang Xing returned to his senses and looked at her strangely. "Yuan, what do you think of Xiao Xiao?" Jiang Yuan. He was actually seriously considering this matter. Jiang Yuan glared at him, and after a long time, she sighed and said softly, "Older brother, have you forgotten that I said that I do not want to marry?" Without waiting for Jiang Xing's reply, she continued, "Moreover, the affairs of the world are ever changing, and the in-laws may become man-eating wolves. Has older brother forgotten about mother?" Zhao Mei was so innocent, yet in the Jiangfu, her youthful and flower-like life had been ruined. Was it not because of Jiang Quan's heartlessness? Moreover, in her previous life, she had fallen to the point where her life was worse than death, and her relatives had been completely slaughtered. Was it not because Xianli had used a gentle facade to deceive her into trusting him? In the end, the human heart was the most unreliable thing in this world. The coldness in Jiang Yuan's eyes was too deep, and even Jiang Xing was slightly stunned. He reached out and touched Jiang Yuan's head, "But you are still a little girl, how can you speak so maturely?" He said, "With older brother here, you will not be wronged. Older brother does not need to worry about me. I have a way to fulfill older brother's wish at this time's palace banquet. Older brother must also promise me one thing, do not use your own future to gamble for my happiness. To our Yuan, the higher older brother's position is, the safer it will be, and our Yuan will be more at ease." Jiang Xing looked at her and nodded, "All right, I promise you." In the capital, at the 8th prince's fu, Xian Li's expression was fretful. His pair of eyes, which had always been gentle and affectionate, were now exuding anger. Unexpectedly, Li Dong and the other two had committed suicide in prison to escape punishment. Given Li Dong's temperament, he would definitely not do such a thing. But now, his every move was under the eyelids of others. With this incident at the Prime Minister's fu, the imperial censors were eyeing him covetously, and they could not wait for him to commit some kind of mistake. The people he had sent out had not been able to obtain any useful information. Thinking that he had lost a good chess piece for no reason, Xianli felt extremely depressed and indignant. Although he had already decided to abandon the Prime Minister's fu, this was not the time. In his hands, he had always squeezed out every last bit of value. Even if the Prime Minister's fu was to be destroyed, it had to be destroyed in a way that would pave the way for him to move forward. Who would have thought that Li Dong and the other two would die in prison for no reason? The dead could not testify, and those suspicions towards him would become a thorn, deeply embedded in the emperor's heart, unable to be pulled out. How could he not be angry and resentful? A subordinate beside him came to report, "Your Highness, the investigation has been completed." That day, young Master Li originally wanted to deal with eldest Jiang Miss, but for some unknown reason, he attracted the soldiers and even the Scarlet Thunder army was destroyed in one fell swoop. Jiang Yuan, it was Jiang Yuan again. Xian Li suddenly stood up, but then sat back down. He only felt stuffy in his chest. Lian thought that he had concealed the true strength of the Scarlet Thunder army, but in fact, everything was under his control. He had thought of a certain opportunity to take the Scarlet Thunder army under his control. Who would have thought that the Scarlet Thunder army would become a hot potato, and he could only watch helplessly as they were captured by the soldiers. Thinking of that day when several Scarlet Thunder army units were suddenly destroyed, he could not help but suspect that those soldiers were all from the Zhao and Guan families. Not to mention the Guan family, the Zhao family was really too coincidental. At this moment, when he heard his subordinates say that Lian originally wanted to deal with Jiang Yuan, he gradually understood in his heart. If Jiang Yuan was really the cause of all this, then she was really too scary. He remembered that when Lian had not been captured, the two of them had chatted, and Lian had once said, "Eldest Jiang Miss's wisdom is not comparable to that of ordinary people. If there is a chance, your Highness can consider taking her in for your own use. If not, you must kill her, otherwise, she will become a big trouble in the future." At that time, he had scoffed, but now that he thought about it, his expression could not help but become serious. What was Lian hinting at in those words? And this time, if Lian had really fallen into Jiang Yuan's hands, then he had to carefully re-evaluate this eldest Jiang Mississippi. If Jiang Yuan's wisdom could not be compared to Lian's, then she would be an excellent help. In any case, he wanted to rope in the Jiang and Xia families, so marrying Jiang Yuan or Jiang Su was no different. And now that Jiang Su's reputation was ruined, Jiang Yuan was so intelligent. He thought of Jiang Yuan's charming and moving appearance in her youth. His heart swayed, and he suddenly sighed in comfort. If he could take her in for his own use, if he could take her in for his own use. He suddenly smiled, swept away the haze on his face, and said, "Get ready, I want to enter the palace to see Imperial Mother." It was still unknown who would emerge victorious. Chapter 97. Green tiles, red walls, layers upon layers of curtains, the dazzling palace looked bright and beautiful, but who knew how many bones were buried inside? The Hall of Dreams was located in the southeast corner of the palace. The environment was quiet and it was adjacent to a large peony garden. The peonies were specially sent from Luoyang on horseback by the emperor. They were carefully tended by craftsmen and transplanted here. Every time the peonies bloomed, the peony garden would be the most beautiful. The one who lived here was one of the 4 concubines, Imperial Concubine Chen, the mother of the 8th prince. When the emperor first ascended the throne, his foundation was not stable. Imperial Concubine Chen's father had the military power and sent Imperial Concubine Chen to the palace to show his support for the emperor. For the emperor, the stability of his throne was guaranteed. The Chen family had a certain debt of gratitude to him. Imperial Concubine Chen was a gentle and graceful person. She was born beautiful and talented. She had never been jealous of the other beauties. The emperor loved her temperament of standing aloof from worldly affairs the most. Intentionally or unintentionally, he protected her. Later, Imperial Concubine Chen gave birth to the 8th prince, Xian Li. The empress gave birth to the crown prince, Concubine Xian gave birth to the 4th prince, Concubine De gave birth to the 5th prince, and Concubine Shu gave birth to Princess Yi. Everyone in the court knew that the 8th prince Xian Li was intelligent and gentle, the 5th prince Xian Hua was honest and courageous, the 4th prince Xian Lang was average and Princess Yi was beautiful. The crown prince was mediocre and useless. The fourth Prince Xian Lang was kind but not scheming. Currently, the court was biased towards Xian Li and Xian Hua. The emperor had always treated imperial concubine Chen well. Although Xian Hua was also very powerful, his mother concubine Da was not as favored as imperial concubine Chen. The imperial court was in turmoil, but the Hall of Dreams was warm and prosperous. It was as if this place was far away from the intrigues and jealousies, and there was only a long time to have a peaceful dream of longing for the misty reign of Jiangnan. In the room, a thick Persian wool rug was laid on the white jade couch. The slender white fur covered the rug and was embedded with bright jewels. The four maids in thin white robes all had delicate features. They stood quietly with their heads lowered. A light breeze blew in from outside and lifted a corner of the curtain. They really looked like fairies from the Nine Heavens Palace. The woman sitting on the seat was earnestly doing her meridian. Her slender and jade-like hands were not smeared with the slightest bit of nail polish. Her fingernails were emitting a faint pink luster, and her slender and jade-like fingers were nimbly moving up and down. Unlike the other women in the palace, this woman did not have the slightest air of superiority. She bit off a piece of silk thread, revealing a fair and pretty face. Her facial features were delicate and pretty, without the slightest bit of aggressiveness. Instead, there was a kind of gentleness that was like water. It was as if she was not some high and unattainable noble concubine in the palace, but a young girl in the boudoir of a family in a corner of Jiangnan. Clear, sweet, gentle, and graceful. Although Jiang Su Su was born with incomparable elegance, there was still a trace of a deliberate element to it. However, this woman was not completely like that. Even in this imperial palace, there was a kind of gentleness and grace that was out of place. It was as soft as water that was engraved into his bones. There was a faint smile on her lips. If someone were to pass by at this moment, they would definitely think that the scene in front of them was just like the name of this hall, just a romantic dream. The curtain was heavily lifted, and a figure walked in. With a smile on her face, she said, "Imperial Mother." Imperial concubine Chen put down the silk thread in her hand and looked at the person who had come. Suddenly, she smiled and said, "Why didn't you send someone to inform me?" Xian Li looked at the woman in front of him, and his previously restless heart slowly calmed down. Imperial concubine Chen had a special kind of magical power. It was as if, in her hands, even the most complicated matters in the world were like densely packed silk threads. She could always easily sort them out and turn them into colorful silk threads. Xian Li said, "Imperial Mother, do you know about the matter of the Prime Minister's fu?" Imperial concubine Chen's expression slightly froze, and she said, "I know." The imperial palace was so big. Every day, there were so many palace people coming in and out. Even if they didn't want to know, they would still reach her ears. Imperial concubine Chen knew about the matter of the Prime Minister's fu, but she was not worried about Xian Li. Xian Li was also not depressed because of this. He said, "Son wants to ask Imperial Mother for a favor." "What favor?" Imperial concubine Chen smiled slightly. "I beg Imperial Mother to persuade Imperial Father to bestow a marriage between me and eldest Miss Jiang." Xian Li opened his mouth. Imperial concubine Chen's expression was gentle and calm. Hearing his words, she could not help but be startled. She frowned and asked, "What?" "Regarding the matter of the Prime Minister's fu, Imperial Father has already begun to suspect son." Xian Li said, "In this matter, Imperial Mother is unable to help." Imperial concubine Chen was currently favored in the imperial palace. Aside from official Chen and Imperial concubine Chen being gentle and graceful, more importantly, she was smarter than the other three concubines. She always had a gentle and considerate appearance. She did not rashly discuss matters of the court, nor did she influence the emperor's decisions. When the emperor came to the Palace of Dreams, he would always have a wonderful dream. What the emperor liked about her was that she did not fight for anything. If she rashly interceded for Xianli or expressed even the slightest bit of such intentions, since ancient times, the emperor would be suspicious. He would no longer be as gracious as he was in the past. Imperial concubine Chen knew this, and Xianli also knew this. Thus, he would not easily ask Imperial concubine Chen to help plead for leniency. He knew that even if the emperor had doubts about him, as long as Imperial concubine Chen continued to favor him, the emperor would not truly give up on him. The Jiang Fu and Xia Fu are involved. Something happened to the Prime Minister's Fu, and the direction of the court has changed. Sun must stabilize my own power, and must also make my relationship with the Xia family clear to the public. If I act rashly, Imperial Father will also suspect that eldest Jiang young lady is not favored in the Jiang family. Using her name and reputation, I can make Imperial Father relax his vigilance, but not to the extent of cutting off all ties with the Xia Fu. Imperial concubine Chen quietly looked at Xianli. Your Imperial Highness, you did not tell Ben Gong the truth. Xianli's gaze was sluggish. He knew that this imperial mother had always been intelligent. Otherwise, how could she be so stable as the head of the 4 concubines in the man-eating harem? The emperor knew that she was not completely without schemes, but was still willing to favor her. This was her grasp of the human heart. In fact, on his path to the throne, Imperial concubine Chen had also given him many ideas. Even the quiet disappearance of the 7th and 9th princes in the palace could not escape Imperial concubine Chen's involvement. But what of it? Now, those people had long become a pile of fertilizer for the peony flower. Imperial concubine Chen's seat was even more stable. He pondered for a moment. Eldest Jiang young lady is not an ordinary person. The sudden collapse of the Prime Minister's Fu is largely related to her. Lian once reminded me that Jiang Ruan's wisdom is not ordinary. If she can be of help, she can be of great use. Sun thinks that since she has a talent that can transcend the heavens, perhaps she can be of use. A talent that can transcend the heavens? Imperial concubine Chen shook her head. Lian is obstinate and self-opinionated. He does not know that there is always someone better out there. It is not strange that he fell into the hands of others. Ben Gong had long known that this day would come. It is just that he fell into the hands of a woman, which is really shocking. Xianli said, exactly, so Sun thinks that if we can become in-laws, I will take that woman for my own use. Imperial concubine Chen laughed in spite of herself. Your Highness is still young and overly reliant on Lian. Thus, you believe his words without a doubt. Ben Gong feels that the woman's talent is too great an exaggeration. However, since your Highness has said so, presumably, in your Highness's eyes, that woman is also different from ordinary women. Your Highness and Ben Gong are mother and son. In a few days, during the palace banquet, Ben Gong will personally bring up this matter. This consort will only give her 1 year. If she is unable to display her exceptional talent, then she will not be worthy of the title of your Highness's fiancée. The fiancé can be changed, but the eldest young miss of the Jiang family will probably perish. What does your Highness think? She lightly spoke of the matter of plotting to kill someone, yet her eyes were as gentle as a lotus, as if she was a kind and gentle fairy. Xianli pondered for a long time before raising his head. A trace of ruthlessness flashed across his face, which was very similar to Imperial concubine Chen's, as he said, good. If she cannot be of use to me, then she must be eliminated, lest she becomes a major trouble in the future. Imperial concubine Chen smiled in satisfaction. Your Highness is wise. She picked up a few knots from the basket at the side. Yesterday, Gong Xian made a few knots. Come and see if they are suitable. The day before the palace banquet, the old Jiang madam specially ordered Rui Lu to deliver the new clothes that had been made. The clothes were all materials that the young lady of the Jiang Fu had personally picked out. When Lu Rui delivered the clothes, she looked at Jiang Ruan and said with some regret, Miss Jiang's complexion is naturally fair. That bolt of fire cloud satin from the other day was actually excellent. Although this bolt of peach pink is slightly better, it is not as bright as that bolt of bright red. In Lu Rui's opinion, Jiang Wan was actually very suitable for bright red clothes. Her appearance was originally bright and beautiful, and wearing bright red clothes made her appear even more tender and beautiful. Moreover, her temperament was also somewhat calm. When she wore that fiery color, it actually had a kind of coldness like ice. Fire and ice were originally two extremes, but when worn on her body, they were exceptionally compatible. That incomparable beauty caused people to be unable to take their eyes off her. Jiang Wan herself was also well aware of this point, so she usually wore mostly red clothes. However, this time, when she rushed to the palace banquet, she had unexpectedly chosen a peach-pink dress. Although Lu Rui had tactfully hinted, Jiang Wan had already made up her mind. Helplessly, Lu Rui could only do the same. Many thanks for shopkeeper Lu's good intentions. Jiang Wan smiled, however, I still prefer this bolt. Although she did not understand why Jiang Wan was so insistent, Lu Rui understood from the few times that this young lady of the Jiang family was a very opinionated person. At present, there must be a reason, but she just did not want to share it with her. As she thought about it, she smiled and said, "The Jie's beauty is unparalleled, and you look good in anything you wear. It is just that the other young ladies in the Fu are extremely concerned about this matter at the palace banquet, and have ordered me to redo their clothes several times." She tactfully reminded Jiang Wan. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. The palace banquet is of great importance, and the younger sisters do not want to lose face for the Jiang Fu, so naturally, this is how it should be. What kind of place was the palace banquet? If it were not for this year's major flood in the great Jin dynasty, perhaps these daughters of official families would never have such an opportunity in their entire lives. Not only that, there would naturally be young masters of noble families at the palace banquet. Everyone wanted to leave a good impression, and if they were fated to marry in the future, it would naturally be a great thing. Therefore, for the young ladies of official families, especially those born of concubines, the palace banquet was an opportunity that was more important than their lives. After Lu Rui delivered the clothes, she stood up and took her leave. Jiang Wan ordered Lu Zhu to go out and send her off, but unexpectedly, Jiang Xing entered the courtyard. As soon as he saw her, he asked, Wan, is the palace banquet ready for tomorrow? Seeing the new clothes placed to the side, he said, since the new clothes have been made, Wan will definitely amaze everyone tomorrow. In Jiang Xing's eyes, Jiang Wan was certainly excellent. She was beautiful, gentle, sensible, and strong. He did not understand what red or pink clothes meant, and only felt that Jiang Wan looked good in anything. Jiang Wan was too lazy to pay attention to his nonsense. Unexpectedly, Jiang Xing sat down opposite her and said seriously, the palace cannot be compared to the Fu. Everything must be followed. The people in the Jiang Fu have probably never taught you the etiquette of entering the palace. Even now, they have not sent anyone to remind you. They must want you to make a fool of yourself in front of everyone tomorrow. You must remember. Eldest brother, not waiting for Jiang Xing to finish, Jiang Wan interrupted him, since eldest brother returned, do you think there is anything wrong with me? Jiang Xing was stunned and shook his head, no. This was the truth. Ever since he had returned to the capital, he felt that Jiang Wan had grown up quite a bit. Even her temperament was like a different person from before, and her every movement was extremely elegant. These few days, he had followed Guan Yonghan everywhere and had met many young ladies of high officials and noble families, but he felt that none of them could compare to Jiang Ruan's elegance. Jiang Wan was still young, and Jiang Quan had left her at the rural residence for a whole 5 years without caring about her. Who knew that not only had she not been brought up to have the temperament of a village woman, but she had also grown up to be like a noble lady in the palace, not even inferior to a princess. Jiang Wan smiled, since there is nothing wrong, why does eldest brother need to worry? I can handle the Jiang Fu, so naturally, I can also handle the palace. There is no difference between the palace and the Jiangfu, it's just that the conditions are a bit harsher. Jiang Xing frowned, but you have never been to the palace, eldest brother. Jiang Wan interrupted him. I know the ranks of the palace maids, the rewards given by eunuchs and eunuchs, the etiquette to perform when meeting a noble, and I also know which side palace halls cannot be entered. She said indifferently, how much does eldest brother know? After entering the palace, do you know who is the most trusted eunuch by His Majesty's side? Which little eunuch is the most unremarkable little eunuch by His Majesty's side, his adopted son? 2 of the 4 palace maids by the Empress Dowager's side know martial arts. Which beauty has the fiercest temper and is best avoided if there is nothing important? She spoke slowly and firmly, but Jiang Xing listened with fear and trepidation. In his heart, he felt that it was absurd and inconceivable, but he had never doubted Jiang Ruan's words. Jiang Ruan's tone made it seem as if she knew these palace secrets by heart, even as if she had seen them with her own eyes. Naturally, Jiang Wan could not have seen them with her own eyes, but these were the most private matters of the palace. How could she, a young lady of a large family, know about them? Every single one of these matters was a huge matter. A strange feeling arose in his heart, and he looked at Jiang Wan. Wan, how do you know all this? Eldest brother thinks. Jiang Wan looked at him and asked. Jiang Xing choked, and could not help but think of Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan's relationship did not seem ordinary, and Xiao Xiao was deeply favored by the emperor. This person's power was monstrous, and he could almost walk sideways in the palace. If Xiao Xiao told Jiang Ruan all this. On one hand, he felt gratified by Xiao Xiao's trust in Jiang Ruan, but on the other hand, he was somewhat angry. Jiang Ruan had nothing to do with the matters of the palace, so why did Xiao Xiao talk about them without rhyme or reason? Jiang Xing only hoped that Jiang Ruan did not know the sufferings of the world, and lived happily and simply. The more Xiao Xiao told Jiang Ruan, the more complicated Jiang Ruan's life became. He looked at Jiang Ruan cautiously and said, Ruan, do not mention these matters to others. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. Naturally, I will not mention it to others. I only want to tell eldest brother that I am not unfamiliar with the matters of the palace. Eldest brother does not need to worry about me. On the contrary, during this trip to the palace, it is inevitable that there will be people secretly plotting against us. Eldest brother must be careful, and do not be impulsive. Jiang Xing nodded, I understand. Suddenly remembering something, Jiang Xing took out an object from his bosom. I have not given it to you before, and now it is returned to its rightful owner. In Jiang Xing's hand, a half-moon-shaped piece of amber lay quietly. The amber was lustrous, and inside was half a butterfly wing, vivid and lifelike. Previously, on Wulin Road, those people had tried to use this amber to lure Jiang Xing into a trap. Jiang Xing had kept this amber, and had not returned it to Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan said, 5 years ago, before I entered the manor, this amber had already disappeared. I did not expect that it would actually remain here until now. Her heart turned cold. This amber had been lost 5 years ago, and it had only reappeared when Jiang Xing returned. Could it be that as early as 5 years ago, Xia Yan had already had the intention of using her to harm Jiang Xing's life? It was really a good plan. Jiang Xing handed the amber to her. Those who secretly plotted against me, I will not let them off lightly. Jiang Ruan looked at the faint hostility emanating from his body, and shook her head. Do not act blindly without thinking. Jiang Xing raised his eyes, but his gaze fell on Jiang Ruan's wrist, and he asked curiously, when did you have this bracelet? Jiang Xing did not know that this was a blood moon bracelet, but the bracelet did not seem to be made of ordinary materials. It emitted a faint glow, and with one look, he knew that it was a rare treasure. Jiang Ruan had never seen this thing at Zhao Mei's place, and it was even more impossible for it to have been a gift from the Jiang family. For a moment, he was somewhat suspicious. Jiang Ruan followed his gaze, and pulled down her sleeve to cover the bracelet. She said, it was a gift from a friend. Jiang Xing still wanted to ask, but Jiang Ruan changed the subject. After Jiang Xing left, Lu Rui, who was accompanied by Lu Zhu, also returned. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji were somewhat nervous about tomorrow's palace banquet, and early in the morning, they were choosing jewelry from the box on the dressing table. Lian Xiao chose a gold cat's eye bracelet, but Bai Ji shook her head and said, it looks a little frivolous. Tomorrow, the palace will be full of nobles, it's better to be a little more dignified. As she spoke, she took out a green jade flower from the box. How about this one? However, Lian Xiao waved her hand again and said, no, this one is a little too solemn, and it doesn't match Mrs. clothes. It doesn't look good this way. Jiang Ruan put down the book in her hand, and said, there's no need to choose. Tomorrow, just do your hair in a single spiral bun, and that rose hair ornament will do. Jiang Ruan had never paid much attention to dressing up, and had always let the two servant girls do it, but this time, it was so clear. Lu Zhu said, Miss, dressing like this is really too simple. Naturally, I have my reasons. Jiang Ruan said, let's do it this way. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji looked at each other. They did not understand what was going on, but they did not ask much. Lu Zhu stuck out her tongue, and hurriedly went to help tidy up the box. Jiang Ruan looked at the book in front of her, and in an instant, her gaze became distant. Chapter 98. Her lips curled into a grim smile. Her intentions, Imperial Consort Chen's and Xian Li's intentions, but tonight, whether it was the right time, the right place, or the right people, she was afraid that it would all be for naught. Whether it was herself or this life, she would not repeat the mistakes of her previous life. Marry Xian Li. Even if she were to marry some Tom, Dick, or Harry, she would disdain to be tied together with that man. Seeing that Jiang Ruan was not moving, she pushed Jiang Ruan's arm. Jiang Ruan turned her head, and Dong Yinger could not help but be startled by the deep meaning in her eyes. Jiang Ruan's beautiful eyes were dark, like a whirlpool that could suck in people. The inky color was dense, but a large expanse of indifference covered the sky, causing people to feel a chill down their spines. After they turned around the palace wall, there were also palace maids leading furins and young ladies in front of them. Before they could clearly see who it was, they heard a crisp and warm voice, Ruan Mimi. She looked Jiang Ruan up and down, and the more she looked, the more dissatisfied she became. Just as she was about to ask Jiang Ruan to change into a new set of clothes, she heard Jiang Xing say, it's getting late, don't waste time. Mimi, you should hurry on your way. Along the way, there was an unprecedented silence and solemnity. After traveling for an unknown amount of time, the carriage finally stopped. Jiang Xing was taken away by the palace eunuch leading the way to the palace to report on his mission. The womenfolk in the carriage followed the other half of the palace maids to the main hall where the womenfolk were waiting. Naturally, the Jiang Fu's carriages were not the only ones parked in front of the palace gates. The carriages of the high officials and nobles were also parked along the way. At this moment, many of the madams and young ladies of the official families alighted from their carriages and pointed at the Jiang Fu's carriages. The old Jiang madam stood at the door and was talking to Jiang Xing. When she saw Jiang Ruan, she said, entering the palace today, eldest girl, you must be careful, don't say the wrong thing. Jiang Su was still elegant and refined. As usual, Jiang Li had chosen a lotus green collared, full-sleeved shirt, and a light purple dress with 2 lotus flowers on one branch. Although she was dressed in a noble manner, her skin color was not as fair as Jiang Su and Jiang Ruan's, and it did not set off the noble aura of her clothes very well. Instead, it seemed a little out of place. At that time, she had been helpless, but she did not expect that it would be used in this life. She sneered in her heart. After the 2 girls got off the car, a beautiful middle-aged woman got off. She looked gentle and beautiful, but for some reason, she looked a little haggard, which made her beauty discounted. Naturally, the palace maid did not know that in Jiang Ruan's previous life, when she had just entered the palace, she had been ostracized by the other beauties because of her excessively beautiful appearance. At every turn, she would use the palace's rules to trip her up. She didn't want to offend those people, so she copied down the thousands of harsh rules in the palace and read them every day. Finally, she didn't do anything wrong. Even those who wanted to use her as a raft would not be able to find the slightest mistake. So this was their plan, so this was Xian Li's plan. Naturally, Jiang Su also felt the change in everyone's gazes. Biting her lower lip, she could not wait to tear Jiang Ruan into pieces. Ever since Jiang Ruan had returned to the Jiangfu, her days had changed. Jiang Ruan had snatched away her position as the eldest daughter, snatched away her brother's position as the Jiang family's benefactor, and now she wanted to snatch away her reputation as the capital's #1 beauty. Jiang Ruan was slightly startled. In her previous life, this had never happened. Her expression froze, and suddenly, a smile blossomed on her face. What does this mean? Why would 8th Highness suddenly choose a fiancé without rhyme or reason? They were both young girls. Hearing people praise her appearance, Dong Yinger's face flashed a trace of crimson. Suddenly, she thought of something mysteriously moved closer to Jiang Ruan's ear. Lowering her voice, she said, "Do you know that Imperial Consort Chen is going to choose a fiancé for 8th Highness today?" That face was extremely charming, with a faintly discernible upward curve at the corners of her eyes, black eyebrows, vermilion lips, pitch-black eyes, and snow-white skin. Not one was not beautiful, not one was not charming. However, she was born with such a bright and charming face, yet her hair was combed into a crisp, single spiral bun, which immediately dissipated some of her charm, leaving only a delicate and moving appearance. "When has Miss not been good-looking?" Lu Zhu said, "Even with such a refreshing dressing, it is difficult to abandon your natural beauty." Everyone knew that the eldest miss of the Jiangfu could not be underestimated ever since she returned after the end of the year. However, the second miss of the Jiangfu had changed her previous appearance of a refined fairy, and had repeatedly committed mistakes. It was in everyone's nature to watch the excitement. The Jiangfu's carriage was right in front of them, and for a moment, many inquisitive gazes were cast towards the carriage of the Jiangfu's womenfolk. Xia Yan saw the half of the crescent-shaped amber that was exposed, and her expression froze. Thinking that today, Jiang Xing could enter the imperial court with limitless glory to receive the emperor's reward, while Jiang Chao could only lie in bed in a state of shock, she could not help but feel incomparably stuffy. Since the womenfolk were riding in the same carriage, Jiang Li naturally would not take the initiative to speak to others, and Jiang Dan also had a timid expression. Usually, Jiang Su and Xia Yan would pretend to speak gently to ease the atmosphere, but today, perhaps because of old Jiang Furen's anger, Xia Yan was too lazy to deal with them. Jiang Su was also silent, and Jiang Ruan was even less likely to take these matters to heart. She merely propped up her chin with one hand and stared at the embroidery on her clothes with the other, lost in thought. The heavens seemed to be compensating for the previous period of havoc caused by the rain. For the next few days, the sky was clear and the air was clear, and the weather was warm and harmonious. The clouds were light, the sky was azure, and the buds on the branches were spitting out some green. The color of spring quietly enveloped the capital of the Jin dynasty. The few of them laughed and joked around for a while before Kai Ke, who served by old Jiang Furen's side, came over to inform Jiang Ruan that they could set off. Lian Xiao and Baiji woke up early in the morning to prepare food for Jiang Ruan. Fearing that they would have to wait too long in the palace banquet, and that they could not eat too much at once, they had prepared some appetizers early. A plate of ham and egg stew, jade stock porridge, and hibiscus crisps. It was simple and light. After Jiang Ruan finished eating, Lu Zhu brought in a small rattan box and said with a smile, there are many rules in the palace, so this servant has prepared some small snacks for Mississippi. Eating them will not ruin your makeup." She called out, "Wan Mimi." Jiang Wan smiled slightly, "I also do not know." The haze from before was swept away, as if it had only been Dong Yinger's hallucination. Her fingers, hidden in her sleeves, slowly clenched into her palms. Jiang Wan raised her eyes to look at herself in the mirror. She was naturally charming and beautiful, and her facial features were clear and deep. Due to her previous life's experience, in this life, she always looked like she was beyond her age. Moreover, the single conch bun was lovely, and when placed on her body, it revealed a bit of a young girl's innocence that was not usually present. Her gaze slightly deepened. In the palace in her previous life, according to the rules, one had to comb their hair in a thick and complicated style, and their hair was full of hairpins and ornaments. How could it be as refreshing and simple as it was now? A trace of coldness flashed in Xia Yan's eyes, but she still did not say anything. With a smile on her face, she began to talk to the palace maid who was leading the way. Jiang Li had long been impatient, and upon seeing this scene, she hurriedly followed. The old Jiang madam could only give up, and after giving a few more instructions, she turned to Xia Yan and coldly said, "Today, I will hand over these servant girls to you. You must be careful, and do not make any mishaps." Even so, she still wanted to enter the palace, which was indeed meaningful. "You still know that natural beauty cannot be abandoned." Lian Xiao squinted her eyes and laughed, "You really know how to talk." Jiang Su stood next door. As before, she was dressed in a light white silk embroidered for blessings Rui pattern with a neckline and narrow sleeves. She was wearing a floor-length moon skirt with pinched teeth embroidered Rui pattern, and a white jacquard muslin soft satin draped over her body. Her hair was combed into an exquisite flying immortal bun, with Buddha beads inserted in her hair and a blue phoenix crown in her hand. On her wrist, there was a fine suet jade bracelet. Her demeanor was delicate, and at first glance, she looked like a pure and clean fairy from the ninth heaven. However, when she got closer, she could see that she had put on a thick layer of makeup, presumably to cover up the scars that had been left in the thorns some time ago. Xia Yan was so angry that her face turned pale. Jiang Xing smiled, turned around, and mounted his horse. Jiang Su's expression froze for a moment, and then, as if nothing had happened, she said, "Mother, let's go." Lian Xiao said, "That's true." At first glance, there was only a smear of gorgeous pink, and it was rather tacky, not as elegant as Jiang Su's matchless beauty. When that person alighted from the carriage, she stood beside Jiang Su, slender and elegant, with her own charm. Everyone couldn't help but look at her face, and couldn't help but hold their breath. Along the way, some of the Furins could tell that there were a few young ladies in the Jiangfu. Putting aside the two Shu daughters, eldest Jiang Miss and second Jiang Miss each had their own merits, but in terms of bearing and etiquette, eldest Miss was a cut above. Although second Miss did not make any mistakes, she appeared stiff and immature, and was not as natural and proper as Jiang Wan. She had helped Xia Yan out of trouble, and normally, the old Jiang madam would not have said anything if she had heard it. However, at this moment, her expression did not soften, and she coldly said, "It's good that she knows." She then flicked her sleeves and left without looking back. Seeing that these young ladies each had their own merits, the old Jiang madam's gaze fell on Jiang Wan, and she could not help but frown. "Why are you dressed like this?" In the old Jiang madam's eyes, it was not important how Shu daughters dressed, as long as they did not go out of line. However, the daughters were different, as they represented the Fu's face when they went out. Even Jiang Su, who was elegant and refined, wore clothes of the best quality. Entering the palace was not the same as being a guest in the Fu of other officials. What was important was dignity. Although Jiang Ruan's appearance was good, this outfit was a little too ordinary. It did not appear formal, and was not even as luxurious as Jiang Li's. Everyone looked at her, and then looked at Jiang Su. With this comparison, the makeup on Jiang Su-su's face was a little too thick, and the hairpin in her hair seemed a little too complicated. A fairy was not so fresh, but this lively and fragrant beauty had a completely different kind of beauty. Our Fu has a maidservant whose elder sister is serving in the palace. Yesterday, when she went home to visit her relatives, she told us. This matter is no longer a secret, and all the servants in the palace know about it. Dong Ying stamped her feet. My mother insisted that I dress like this today, saying that it would be great if I entered the palace and became the 8th prince's consort. But I don't want to marry 8th Highness at all. I only want to find a person that I truly love and spend the rest of my life with. Dong Ying thought for a moment, then suddenly smiled, but there are so many women in the palace tonight, and 8th Highness will not take a fancy to me. Ruan Mimi, you have always been smart. Quickly think of who will catch the eye of Imperial Consort Chen and become the 8th prince's consort. Jiang Ruan smiled. Dong Jijie is the one who is very beautiful. Just as everyone saw the elegant and refined fairy, they saw a red shadow flash in the carriage. The next second, the curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a pretty figure walked out. The old Jiang madam looked at Xia Yan with a rather dissatisfied expression. She had long disliked this daughter-in-law of hers. Zhao Mei was too warm and pure, and brainless. This daughter-in-law was also too scheming. These days, Jiang Su-su and Jiang Chao had met with frequent mishaps, and she was even more displeased with Xia Yan. 2 perfectly fine children had been raised like this by Xia Yan. Just thinking about it made the old Jiang madam extremely angry. On the other hand, the palace maid could not help but flash a trace of surprise in her eyes. There were many daughters of wealthy families who abided by the rules, and there were also many who excelled in etiquette, but there was no one who could be so outstanding. Looking at the way she walked, her eyes were focused, her steps were graceful, and her skirt did not move in the slightest. Her hands were naturally crossed, her chin was slightly raised, and her eyes were focused. Her expression was humble but not lowly, noble but not arrogant. She grasped it very well. Her steps were very steady, and there was no fear or curiosity in her eyes that others would have when entering the palace for the first time. All kinds of emotions were hidden in that pair of beautiful and charming eyes, making it difficult for others to see clearly. For the old Jiang madam, Jiang Xing had performed a meritorious service and gained face for the Jiang family. Jiang Xing was the glory of the Jiang family. As for the conflict between Jiang Xing and Xia Yan, it was just a young person's temporary thinking. They were all people of the Jiang Fu, and even if the bones were broken, the tendons were still connected. In the end, she still had to think for the Jiang Fu. Baiji helped Jiang Ruan with her hair and said, "What else is there to prepare? Don't forget." Her hands were very deft, and with a few flips, she managed to create a beautiful single spiral bun. She picked out a light red rose hairpin from a jewelry box and gently inserted it into Jiang Ruan's hair. She smiled and said, "It's done." Dong Ying saw Jiang Ruan's attire and said, "Ordinarily, I know that you are beautiful, but I did not know that your attire today is actually somewhat interesting." Jiang Su-su smiled and said, "Grandmother, mother is not a child, and naturally understands these things. Grandmother dotes on mother so much that you explain everything clearly, no matter how big or small, this granddaughter will be jealous." I heard that it was Imperial Consort Chen's idea. Dong Ying's voice became even lower. Think about it, His 8th Highness has now reached the age to marry, but he does not even have a Tongfang by his side. Her face was somewhat red, but she still continued, Imperial Consort Chen is anxious. Tonight, there are many young ladies of noble families at the palace banquet, and Imperial Consort Chen said that she would personally choose a marriage partner for His 8th Highness. His Majesty has already given his approval. Every Fu's womenfolk had been arranged for a separate palace maid to receive them. As Xia Yan spoke to the palace maid, her gaze involuntarily swept over Jiang Su-su. Long before entering the palace, she had invited an extremely reputable Momo from outside the Jiang Fu to teach Jiang Su etiquette, all so that Jiang Su could amaze the world with a brilliant feat. Jiang Su's talent had spread far and wide, but this was the first time that she had come to the palace. There were many opportunities in the palace, and as long as there was a sliver of possibility, one's future life could be vastly different. After the beautiful woman alighted from the carriage, she was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, she stood beside the carriage, waiting for the person inside to alight. After Jiang Su alighted from the carriage, the surrounding people were shocked. Even though Jiang Su's reputation was not as good as it had been in the past, she was, after all, elegant and refined, lovely and moving. Just by standing there, she made people feel that she should be taken good care of. Who would have thought that such a devastatingly beautiful fairy would have such a corrupt character? Even those who had some suspicions before, upon seeing Jiang Su's moving appearance, were shaken. Today, Jiang Su had deliberately dressed up to cover up the scars on her face. In addition, her clothes and accessories were all meticulously made, so naturally, it was easy to catch people's eyes. The departing carriage stopped at the entrance of the Jiang Fu. It was carved in gilded sandalwood, exuding a faint fragrance. The carriage that Miss Jiang sat in was even more exquisite and small. The curtains of the carriage were the color of a sunny day after a rain, and there were tiny sachets hanging from them. Jiang Wan looked at her and asked, "How did Dong Jie know?" Lian Qiao was also astonished and said, "Miss looks quite good like this." Jiang Wan raised her eyes and saw that it was Dong Yinger. She was also rather meticulously dressed today, and it was an excellent match for her generous and lively temperament. After she and Xia Yan greeted each other, she spoke to the capital governor's madam, then took Jiang Ruan's arm and walked to the side, whispering to each other as they walked. Xia Yan was very dissatisfied in her heart. The old Jiang madam had lectured her in front of everyone, which made her lose a lot of face. At once, she clenched her fists and took a deep breath in her heart. Only then did she raise a gentle smile and say, "Daughter-in-law will listen to mother's teachings." A peach-colored brocade gown inlaid with 3 plates of gold, a floor-length dress with rose embroidery flowers, and a gold-colored embroidery with intricate beads and patterns. Like a rose that had just bloomed, it still carried the fragrance of morning dew. It was young and tender, but it did not obscure the elegance of the wind. She had not applied any makeup, and there was only a single rose ornament in her hair. On her hand, there was no extra jewelry, only a bracelet that emitted a faint blue light. Although it was unknown what material it was made of, it was obviously not an ordinary item. Xia Yan boasted that she came from a scholarly family and attached great importance to matters of etiquette. It was difficult to conceal her contentment when she spoke to the palace maid, but she overlooked the contempt in the palace maid's eyes. What kind of person was that palace maid? She had been in the palace for so many years, and had seen many more noble people than Xia Yan. Although Xia Yan understood etiquette, Xia Cheng had once been a bastard son, so he did not need to be properly educated. It was inevitable that Xia Yan would have her hands and feet bound with a sense of pettiness. Even Jiang Su, whom she had painstakingly cultivated, also had some of the same cautiousness as Xia Yan. Although she tried her best to appear calm and indifferent, in front of these people with unique insight, there was still a sense of hypocrisy. The curtain of the carriage was lifted by the maid, and the first girl to come down was dressed in a light yellow dress. She had delicate features, and her expression was timid and lovable. Immediately after, a young girl dressed in a lotus green dress walked down. She was also very beautiful, but appeared slightly mean, and her clothes were overly gorgeous. Jiang Dan was dressed in a duck yellow robe embroidered with cranes. She had a round collar and slanted front blouse, and her hair was styled in a unique yaotai bun. Beside Jiang Su and Jiang Dan, she looked like a small, lovable animal. Although she was not outstanding, she had a special kind of daintiness. Her etiquette was not like that of a young lady from an official's family. It was as if she was a noble who had lived in the depths of the palace for many years. Her every move was filled with familiarity and etiquette, and not a single step was wrong. Chapter 99. The Jade Level Hall was already filled with all the Furins and young ladies. Almost all of them were relatives of high officials and nobles. There were also many nobles in the palace who took care of them. At this moment, they were all gracefully and quietly exchanging greetings. They did not appear overly formal or presumptuous. On the high seat, the Empress sat in the middle, and the 4 consorts sat below her with a smile. At this moment, they were also smiling at the Furins and young ladies below, occasionally exchanging a few words of greeting. They looked very cordial. The young eunuch who was waiting to deliver the order announced loudly, "The Madam of the Minister's Fu has arrived." Everyone's gaze uniformly turned towards the door. The Minister of War, Jiang Quan, had recently been in the limelight in the capital. This was not because of anything else, but because eldest young Master Jiang, who had just returned to the capital, was currently the youngest deputy general in the Great Jin dynasty. Moreover, as soon as he returned to the capital, he had repeatedly performed meritorious deeds. It was said that he had been favored by His Majesty. It could be assumed that in the future, his official career path would be smooth and he would have a bright future. As Furins, they would more or less hear a word or two from their masters. There was no lack of young ladies present who had reached the marriageable age. Some of them had thoughts in their hearts that they wanted to climb up the Jiang family's door. Now that they heard that Minister Jiang's family had arrived, they naturally cast their gazes in their direction. Xia Yan and the others actually thought that the Furins were looking at her, and could not help but straighten their backs. The smile on their faces was gentle and dignified, and they walked very steadily. Everyone watched in silence. Xia Yan and Jiang Su appeared gentle and elegant. Jiang Li was in high spirits but slightly frivolous. Jiang Dan was delicate and timid, and could not stand up to such a grand occasion. On the contrary, Jiang Ruan, who walked behind Xia Yan, walked at a pace that was neither fast nor slow. There was a bright smile on her lips. Her smile was bright and charming, and her every movement revealed a noble elegance that only people in the palace possessed. Looking at her like this, everyone remembered that Xia Yan was not Jiang Xing's biological mother. Jiang Ruan and Jiang Xing were real brother and sister. If Jiang Xing were to be promoted and become rich in the future, Jiang Ruan would also rise with him. Looking at Jiang Ruan's ability to advance and retreat, even when entering and leaving a grand occasion like the palace banquet, she did not seem the slightest bit nervous. She did not seem like someone who had been raised in the wilderness. Some of the madams also had other thoughts in their minds. They were wondering if they should settle this young lady of the Jiang family back home as soon as possible. Xia Yan and the rest stepped forward to pay their respects to the Empress. The Empress was over 40 years of age and had taken good care of herself, so she did not appear to be very old. She had been in a high position all year round, but did not have the air of superiority. Perhaps it was because she was not favored and only had the Emperor's respect and the Crown Prince's son. At first glance, she looked no different from an ordinary official's wife. She smiled and motioned for Xia Yan and the rest to rise, her expression very sincere and cordial. Consort Xian was slightly younger and appeared to be cute and lovely. She had a kind of naivety about her. It was no wonder that she gave birth to the 4th prince, Xian Lang, who had such a mediocre son. Concubine Da was older, and she was dignified and virtuous, worthy of the word Da. The 5th prince, Xianhua, was also very reliable in the imperial court. He was loyal, filial, brave, and resolute. At least, he was a virtuous person. Consort Shu was born beautiful and charming. If imperial consort Chen was said to be the misty rain in a corner of Jiangnan, then consort Shu was a smear of light in a foreign grassland. Her temperament was also very capricious and shrewd. Princess He had inherited her beauty, and also her temperament. She was equally capricious and domineering. Sitting next to the Empress, the one who appeared to be the most gentle and beautiful was Imperial Consort Chen. If the Empress and the other consorts were said to have some of the elegance and bearing of the nobles of the imperial palace, this one was like an ordinary young girl from Jiangnan. There was not the slightest trace of a refined air about her. Sitting here, she seemed to be out of tune with the imperial palace. It was as if she had brought this area into the misty reign of Jiangnan. Jiang Yuan smiled and bowed, but her heart seemed to have stopped at that moment. The people sitting here were all old acquaintances from her past life. It was just that she was too lowly and could not often see these consorts. However, Imperial Consort Chen was an exception. Not only did she not ridicule or belittle her like the other consorts, but she would often summon her to the palace of contemplation to talk. Imperial Consort Chen had a gentle temperament and was also Xian Li's birth mother. In her past life, Jiang Yuan had regarded her as a close friend and also as an older sister. She was a relative that was worthy of her trust in the ice-cold palace. However, the things that this Imperial Consort Chen did behind her back, in the end, made her feel as if everything was a joke. She was like a sinister snake beauty. Hidden in her gentleness was a fatal trap. She and Xian Li were the same kind of people. They were completely cold and unreservedly used, then abandoned and killed. Imperial Consort Chen looked at Xia Yan and the others and suddenly said, "You must be eldest Jiang Miss, right? Come forward and let Ben Gong have a look." The Empress was startled and looked at Jiang Yuan thoughtfully. Jiang Li unwillingly glanced at Jiang Yuan, unable to conceal the jealousy in her eyes. Jiang Dan lowered her head, not daring to raise her eyes. Jiang Su's face stiffened, as if she couldn't believe it. Jiang Yuan slowly raised her head. In the split second that she raised her head, the smile at the corner of her lips disappeared. When she raised her head, she saw a slightly cold and indifferent face. Imperial Consort Chen carefully looked at her and did not seem to see the displeasure on her face. She smiled and said, "Truly a beautiful child." When the surrounding madams saw this scene, they began to discuss in low voices. Dong Yinger, who was sitting on the side, felt a little uneasy. She recalled that her mother had previously mentioned that Imperial Consort Chen had the intention of choosing a consort for the 8th prince. She could not help but break out in a cold sweat for Jiang Yuan. Jiang Yuan indifferently said, "Thank you, Nyang Nyang, for your undeserved praise. Yuan Yang does not deserve it." Her words could not be said to be warm, and there was not even the most basic of respect. There was only a faint resistance. When this resistance was heard by Imperial Consort Chen, she paused for a moment. After a moment, her smile became more amiable. "I wonder if Jiang Furen, eldest miss, is betrothed?" Xia Yan's body stiffened, and an indescribable fire suddenly erupted in her heart. Jiang Yuan, it was Jiang Yuan again. What kind of person was this Imperial Consort Chen? She was the most beloved woman in the palace, yet the first person she had inquired about was Jiang Yuan, not Jiang Su. Could it be that these people were all blind? Jiang Yuan was born with a foxy face, and with one look, one could tell that she was not a peaceful person. However, even though she had 1,000 thoughts in her heart, her face did not show the slightest trace of it. She still replied humbly, replying to Nyang Nyang's words, "Yuan Yang is only 11 this year, and has yet to betroth to anyone." "Ah, that's good." The smile on Imperial Consort Chen's beautiful face became even more sincere. That spotlessly white and smooth face seemed to be covered with a faint layer of mist, and her emotions were unexpectedly difficult to guess. Her words were shocking. "Such a lovely child, of course we can't just casually marry him. Ben Gong seems to like eldest Miss Jiang very much, and I really wish to personally betroth her." These words were too explicit, and the faces of the surrounding Furens could not help but reveal a complicated expression of surprise and understanding. Consort Xian looked at Jiang Yuan with great interest, Consort did not bat an eyelid, and the Empress smiled without moving. However, Consort Shu could not help but speak up, what is Qin Jijia saying? In the end, this marriage arrangement still depends on whether the young miss likes it or not. Could it be that Qin Jijia is also getting old, and also likes to do these things that only Icemen do? Consort Shu and Imperial Consort Chen had always been at odds. Consort Shu could not bear to see Imperial Consort Chen acting subservient and aloof from the world of mortals. Of course, more importantly, she was jealous that Imperial Consort Chen had such an astonishingly talented son like Xianli. However, the child that crawled out of her belly was a daughter, which meant that no matter how much she was favored, she would not have a son who could be the heir to the throne. Although the fifth prince's popularity was also quite high, Consort De was not favored, and could even be considered to be very low-key. In comparison, Consort Shu hated Imperial Consort Chen the most. Whatever Imperial Consort Chen said, Consort Shu would retort. When Imperial Consort Chen heard Consort Shu's words, she was not angry, and only looked at Jiang Ruan with a smile without saying a word. She was born with gentle features, and when she looked at someone with such a gentle smile, those who did not know her would think that she truly loved Jiang Ruan, and that she could not bear to part with her. Jiang Ruan's gaze was slightly lowered, and she did not meet Imperial Consort Chen's gaze. Outsiders looked at her bashfully, but no one knew that at this moment, her heart was surging with hatred. In just a few short minutes, it was as if two masters were exchanging blows. The Furins and young ladies present could not see anything, and only Jiang Ruan herself knew what she was thinking. How was Imperial Consort Chen's gaze gentle? It was clearly that of a poisonous snake eyeing its prey. Poisonous snakes, she naturally had a way to deal with them. Imperial Consort Chen's generosity towards Jiang Ruan caused Xia Yan's heart to feel extremely stifled. Her following answers were somewhat perfunctory, and in the end, she still revealed some reluctance. If this was in the past, then it would have been fine, but after what Great Master Hui Ju had said about her being a jinx, everyone began to doubt the virtuous and magnanimous attitude that she had previously pretended to be. At this moment, with her actions, everyone was even more certain that the minister's wife was, in fact, a person with a sweet face but a bitter heart. Otherwise, why would Imperial Consort Chen deliberately inquire about Jiang Ruan? Imperial Consort Chen asked a few more questions, and the Empress waved for Jiang Ruan to withdraw. Jiang Ruan had just followed Xia Yan to sit down when Dong Yinger got up and walked to Jiang Ruan's side to sit down. In a low voice, she said, "Just now, I was really worried to death about you. Are you all right?" After saying this, she said with some admiration, "Ruan Mimi, you are really bold. Just now, I saw that you were talking to Imperial Consort Nyang Nyang without a trace of nervousness. If it had been me, I'm afraid that I would have long been scared speechless." Jiang Ruan smiled, "There's nothing to be afraid of. I didn't do anything, so I won't be punished." Dong Yinger said with some hesitation, "But Imperial Consort Nyang Nyang seems to like you very much. Could it be that she wants to marry you to His Eighth Highness?" Realizing that her words were somewhat overstepping her boundaries, Dong Yinger looked at Jiang Ruan uneasily. Seeing that Jiang Ruan's expression did not change, she slightly relaxed and said, "Imperial Consort Nyang Nyang usually rarely cares so much about people, but today, she pulled you aside and talked for a long time. Ruan Mimi, don't blame me for being overly sensitive. I'm afraid that right now, all the Furins present here are thinking the same thing as me. If that's really the case, what should you do?" "Really what?" Jiang Ruan asked in reply, "It won't happen." Her tone was not as gentle as usual, and it carried a faint chill. When Dong Yinger heard this, her heart skipped a beat. Thinking that Jiang Ruan was angry and unwilling to marry Eighth Prince, she hurriedly said, "You don't have to worry too much, I'm just making wild guesses. Perhaps Imperial Consort Nyang Nyang simply likes you. You're still so young, even if it's really the case, there's no rush." This consolation was too feeble, and Dong Yinger herself also felt guilty. However, from beginning to end, Jiang Yuan did not show any special emotions, as if she was just a bystander watching other people's affairs. After a while, seeing that it was almost time, the empress got up and called all the furins and young ladies to the main hall to start the palace banquet. In the main hall, the emperor and the male side of the banquet had already taken their places. Because the flood had just passed and the state treasury was a little tight due to the disaster relief, everything at the banquet was simple and not extravagant. It was a far cry from the extravagance of the past. Even the dishes and pastries served at the banquet were very simple. The womenfolk sat down at the female side of the banquet. The emperor and empress sat on the high seats, and next to them sat the current Empress Dowager Ida. Empress Dowager Ida was now 60 years old, and there were already streaks of white at her temples. The turquoise gold thread inlaid with jade and auspicious cloud pattern buckles were luxurious and imposing. Even from the current Empress Dowager Ida's face, one could still vaguely see the elegance of the past. At that time, Empress Dowager Ida was known as the #1 beauty of the Great Jin dynasty. Her facial features were slightly heroic, and when she was young, she had 2 sons and a daughter with the late emperor. When the 8 princes fought for the throne, in order to quell the rebellion and ensure that the emperor ascended to the throne, she sacrificed her eldest son. She even allowed her daughter, Princess Yuan Rong, to marry into another country and borrow troops from the Great Jin to help the new emperor ascend to the throne. It could be said that without Empress Dowager Ida, there would be no Great Jin dynasty today, and there would be no emperor. Empress Dowager Ida was a person who acted swiftly and decisively, even a little callous. She looked at the people below her indifferently, and the ruby armor on her fingers emitted a threatening luster. When she saw a person at the female side of the banquet, Empress Dowager Ida was suddenly startled. She involuntarily sat up straight and looked at that person. It was a young girl who still looked immature. Because she was sitting at the lower banquet, her face could not be seen clearly, and only the top of her black hair could be seen. Her hair was combed into a simple single spiral bun, and on top of it was a magnificent rose hairpin. She wore a peach-pink dress that was simple and warm. Among the well-dressed young ladies, she appeared particularly fresh and pretty. Although they were too far apart, the young girl seemed to suddenly feel Empress Dowager Ida's gaze, and suddenly raised her head. When she saw Empress Dowager Ida's expression clearly, she did not panic. After a slight astonishment, she returned a smile to Empress Dowager Ida. That smile was clean and clear, but it also had a kind of maturity that did not match her age. It actually overlapped with another person in Empress Dowager Ida's memory. With great difficulty, she resisted the urge to go down and pull that young girl back. After that young girl finished laughing, she went back to talking with the young ladies around her, as if she had not noticed them at all. Empress Dowager Ida, however, sat upright in her seat, slightly absent-minded. As Jiang Yuan and Dong Yinger spoke, the corners of her lips involuntarily curled up slightly. From the corner of her eyes, she saw that Empress Dowager Ida was sitting motionless in her seat, and she could also feel her gaze following her. Jiang Yuan picked up the teacup in front of her and took a sip. It seemed that her original goal had been achieved. It must be known that for this simple goal, this simple action, she had practiced dozens of times in front of the mirror overnight. At the male side of the banquet, it was assumed that the rewards had already been bestowed. Seeing the smile in Jiang Xing's eyes, it must have been a very generous reward. However, Jiang Quan's expression was not very good. The male and female side of the banquet were seated separately. Gu Ida had not seen Jiang Yuan for a long time since the last time. At this moment, he saw Jiang Yuan sitting at the female side of the banquet. The longer the days passed, the more moving she became. His gaze towards her was incomparably warm. There was a gentle smile on Xian Li's lips, and it seemed that there was no difference from the past. However, his left hand unconsciously rubbed it. This action was something he often did when he was in a bad mood. Obviously, regarding the matter of the Prime Minister's foo, even if he tried his best to appear indifferent, it was still difficult for him to conceal the melancholy in his heart. Today, he was dressed in a black brocade robe embroidered with a golden chelan treading on fire and burning wind at the collar. This made his temperament even colder, and his appearance was incomparably handsome. Many of the girls at the female side of the banquet were secretly stealing glances at him. Not long after, another beautiful young girl came from outside the banquet. This young girl was about 14 or 15 years old. She was dressed in a feather blue brocade robe with a golden pheasant heart collar. She was wearing a floor-length, silver-red embroidered skirt with dark embroidery. She was also wearing a gauze embroidered with multicolored flowers and plants. This was already a very gorgeous attire, but when she wore this kind of attire, it did not appear to be mixed up. Instead, it had a kind of gorgeous beauty. Her facial features were deep, and she had a kind of exotic charm. She walked forward and smiled, "Imperial Father. Why have you only arrived now?" The Emperor rebuked her, but his tone was very intimate. Princess He was deeply favored by the Emperor. "This son has picked out the wrong clothes, I must not lose face for Imperial Father." Princess He winked at the Emperor. The Emperor laughed heartily. Her gaze swept across the male side of the banquet, and when she saw Xiao Xiao, her heart jumped. However, the falling flowers yearn for love, but the heartless brook does not. Xiao Xiao did not even glance at her. A trace of disappointment flashed in Princess He's eyes. Dong Yinger touched Jiang Ruan's arm. "Wan Mimi, you said that Princess He likes Xiao Wangye. Is this true?" Dong Yinger had always been extremely fond of hearing such gossip. Now that there was a ready-made material, she naturally would not let it go. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. In her previous life, the matter of Princess He being infatuated with Xiao Xiao was no longer a secret. Almost everyone in the Great Jin dynasty knew about it. Princess He had also vowed that she would not marry anyone but Xiao Xiao. She had even wanted Xu Fei to persuade the emperor to grant a marriage. However, between Princess He and Xiao Xiao, the emperor had unexpectedly chosen Xiao Xiao. He had first asked for Xiao Xiao's opinion. Xiao Xiao was a cold person, so he naturally refused. After hearing the news of Xiao Xiao's rejection, Princess He sought death every day. She had even personally gone to Jinying Wangfu to seek an explanation, but the other party remained stubborn and unmoved. In her previous life, until the end, Princess He and Xiao Xiao did not end up together. Jiang Ruan's eyes drooped. Princess He's experience made people sigh, but that did not include her. This was because in her previous life, Princess He had often tripped her up when she was in the palace. Princess He was a narrow-minded person, and by nature, she was jealous. When Jiang Ruan first entered the palace, she was the most beautiful among the batch of beauties. She was incomparably charming, but Princess He was gorgeous. She did not want anyone to steal her limelight. She often found people to cause trouble for her. There was even one time when she slandered the maidservants in her courtyard for stealing, and all the second-rank palace maids in her courtyard were killed. That scene had appeared in Jiang Ruan's dreams countless times, and every time it happened, she was extremely frightened. Among her old friends in the palace, none of them were kind to others. However, at this moment, the Empress Dowager suddenly said, "Deputy General Jiang, you said today that tomorrow is your younger sister's birthday." Empress Dowager Ida had not avoided the conversation with the men. She had a good relationship with the emperor, so there was no need to guard against anything. Now that she had brought it up, it was thought-provoking. Jiang Ruan was slightly startled. She had forgotten her own birthday. In her previous life, after entering the palace, except for Xianli who would come to see her on her birthday, there was no news of the others. However, that warmth was also fake. Now, after another lifetime, Jiang Xing had actually mentioned her birthday in front of the emperor. This made her not know what to feel. Replying to the Empress Dowager, "It is." Jiang Xing stepped out of the ranks. Where is the eldest daughter of the Jiang family? Empress Dowager Ida, after all, was someone who had experienced the War of the Chaotic Princes, so her tone was slightly dignified. Jiang Wan stood out and softly said, "Subject Jiang Wan kowtows in salute to the Empress Dowager." Her movements were formal and humble, even containing an inexplicable piety. The salute was clearly the salute that an ordinary official's family would give to the Empress Dowager, but for some reason, there was an inexplicable emotion in it. It was incomparably solemn, not like a greeting gift, but like a farewell. Empress Dowager Ida looked at her quietly, looking at the white neck, the rose swaying back and forth, the peach-colored clothes gorgeous and lively. Such a delicate and moving young girl, from head to toe, actually emitted a calm aura. Very much like that person. Her eyes actually became somewhat absent-minded. The emperor saw that the Empress Dowager was lost in thought and coughed lightly. Empress Dowager Ida seemed to recover. He looked at Jiang Wan and said, "You may rise." "Thank you, Empress Dowager." Jiang Wan stood up. She tried her best to ignore the pressure from the emperor and only looked at Empress Dowager Ida with a faint smile. She was born to be extremely beautiful, and she deliberately maintained a gentle smile on her lips. Unexpectedly, she had more of a princess's temperament than a princess. The eyes of the people around were red. Empress Dowager Ida's hands were iron-blooded, and she usually did not get close to people. How did Jiang Wan gain her favor? Everyone was puzzled after much thought. Jiang Xing looked at Jiang Wan nervously. Although he had mentioned Jiang Wan, he did not expect Empress Dowager Ida to suddenly speak. How could the thoughts of the imperial family be so easy to guess? He could not help but feel nervous. Below the stage, Jiang Su and Xia Yan's expressions were somewhat unsightly. Today, first it was Imperial Consort Chen, then it was Empress Dowager Ida. Jiang Ruan's limelight had really been blown away. At the same time, they had a doubt in their hearts. Forget about Imperial Consort Chen, but Empress Dowager Ida regarded Jiang Wan so highly. Could it be that she had really taken a fancy to Jiang Wan as a prince consort? Which prince was it, the 8th prince or the 5th prince? Or the 4th prince? Eldest daughter of the Jiang family, Ijia promises Deputy General Jiang to fulfill your birthday wish. If you have any wishes for tomorrow, you can say them today and Ijia will fulfill them. Empress Dowager Ida said. Jiang Xing had mentioned it to the emperor before, or perhaps he had used his meritorious service in exchange for Jiang Ruan's birthday wish. What protection did Jiang Wan want? She could say it now. Xia Yan and Jiang Su breathed a sigh of relief. It was fine as long as she was not interested in becoming a prince consort. If Jiang Wan really became a prince consort, she would certainly not have a good attitude towards the Jiang Fu. However, the smile on Imperial Consort Chen's lips was somewhat strange. If Jiang Wan took advantage of the situation and asked which family's son she wanted to marry, Jiang Wan smiled slightly, and her tone was somewhat desolate. Empress Dowager, please have mercy. Wan Yang has no request. I only wish to go with Nyangqin to Ningshui Valley to see the newly bloomed peach blossoms. However, this wish is impossible to fulfill. She smiled sadly. Empress Dowager Ida suddenly raised her head. Chapter 100. Everyone did not know why Jiang Wan would say such a great opportunity. Xia Yan sneered in her heart, thinking that Jiang Wan was just putting on an act to gain the Empress Dowager's sympathy. Even so, there was no lack of wives of officials, and women were always soft-hearted in this aspect. Thinking that Jiang Wan had lost her mother when she was young, and now that her birthday was just around the corner, she could not even satisfy such an ordinary wish as looking at the peach blossoms with her mother. Jiang Xing did not expect Jiang Wan to say this, and sighed in his heart. As an elder brother, even if he wanted to make it up to Jiang Ruan in every way and let her live a carefree life, his mother would always be an irreplaceable existence. No matter how steady his sister usually looked, she was just an ordinary little girl who wanted to seek maternal love. On the Zhao family's side, Zhao Guang, Zhao Yuanjia, Zhao Yuanfeng and Zhao Yi all sighed in unison. Madame Li, who had long shed tears, said in a low voice, "Why did Mei-er leave so early? It must have been hard for Wan-er to miss her so much. How sad must it be to not have a biological mother by his side?" Zhao Yulong and Zhao Feizhou also sighed, but only Zhao Yuanping's gaze was deep. He would not assume that Jiang Ruan was simply reminiscing just because she had said so. In fact, in Zhao Yuanping's eyes, Jiang Ruan was a person with a clear purpose. She did everything with a purpose, and she had a wonderful foresight for her purpose. It was really inconceivable to say so. But every seemingly ordinary action that Jiang Ruan did now, in the end, could become an indispensable part of her goal. Moreover, in Zhao Yuanping's heart, Jiang Ruan was not a person who acted on emotions. There must be some meaning behind her words. But, what exactly was it? When the Xia family saw this, they were all dismissive. Xia Jiao, in particular, cursed Jiang Ruan in her heart, thinking that she was just a foxy woman who wanted to put on a lovely and moving appearance. The Xia family did not like it, but there were many men present who had tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex. Seeing the beauty dejected, they only wanted to protect her in the palm of their hands. Especially Gu Yi, whose heart was almost melted by Jiang Ruan's frown. When Guan Lianghan saw this, he asked Xiao Xiao curiously, "What's the matter with that Gu boy? From the looks of it, you've also taken a fancy to that girl from the Jiang family?" Mo Tsong clicked his tongue in wonder. One family has a daughter, and 100 families seek her. Now that Deputy General Jiang is in power, the originally unremarkable eldest Jiang Miss has also risen along with him. It's a good thing, a good thing. As he said this, he casually said to Lu Min, who was sitting beside him, "Lord Lu, don't you agree?" Lu Min casually responded with a few words, somewhat absent-minded. Ever since the emperor appointed him as the Zhuangyuan, he trusted him very much. Almost without any effort, he became a third-rank official. If one were to say that Jiang Xing was the fastest promoted young general in the Great Jin dynasty, then he was the fastest promoted young civil official in the Great Jin dynasty. This was originally a good thing, but the more he entered the imperial court, the more he felt that life was difficult. Many people tried to trip him up in the dark. Some were jealous, and some pretended to flatter him. Every day, he had to wear a fake mask to deal with people. This was not the career that Lu Min wanted. Every time this happened, he would think of the stranger who had exchanged letters with him in the Imperial College. That person had also talked to him about the way of being an official. At first, he had only felt that the other person was too slick and not upright enough. Now, he felt that it was a kind of cleverness that looked at all things. However, that person never appeared again. Xiao Xiao carefully observed Jiang Ruan's every move. He also noticed the Empress Dowager's absent-mindedness. There was a trace of doubt in his heart, but he did not show it on his face. He sat alone and leisurely sipped his tea, attracting the infatuated gazes of the crowd of women. The Empress Dowager finally recovered and said, "What is this wish? Aijia wants to hear your reason." Of all the things in the world, nothing is better than the happiness of family by one's side. Jiang Ruan smiled and said, "However, this subject's daughter and mother have long been separated forever. In this life, there will never be such an opportunity to look at the newly bloomed peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley. Ruanyang only hates that when mother was still alive, we did not look at the peach blossoms a few more times, leaving behind a lifetime of regret that is impossible to make up for." With every sentence she said, Empress Dowager Ida sat up a little straighter. Although the expression on her face did not reveal anything, Jiang Ruan knew that Empress Dowager Ida had heard her words deeply. That's right, everyone knew that Empress Dowager Ida was cold and ruthless. She could even use her own son and daughter. As long as it was for the world, she could give up everything. At that time, Princess Yuan Rong was in the prime of her life and already had a sweetheart. She was unwilling to marry into a foreign country, but she was locked in the palace by Empress Dowager Ida. Princess Yuan Rong begged bitterly, but Empress Dowager Ida did not soften her heart. In the end, Princess Yuan Rong had no choice but to marry into a foreign country. However, not even 3 years later, she died in a foreign country because she was too worried. Empress Dowager Ida did not even allow Princess Yuan Rong's body to be transported over. Thus, Princess Yuan Rong could only sleep in a foreign country forever. Those who knew of this matter all thought that Empress Dowager Ida was too ruthless. Even her own daughter was so vicious. But in fact, in her previous life, Jiang Wan had learned from Xianli that Empress Dowager Ida was not a cold-hearted person. In fact, she valued her 3 children very much. At that time, the death of the first prince was an accident. Princess Yuan Rong's marriage was also an act of helplessness. On the day of Princess Yuan Rong's marriage, Empress Dowager Ida cried for a whole month in the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. When the news of Princess Yuan Rong's death came, Empress Dowager Ida even wanted to go with her. If it were not for the fact that the emperor's throne was still unstable and needed support, Empress Dowager Ida would not have allowed herself to live. The person Empress Dowager Ida loved the most in her life, and the person she felt the most guilty about, was Princess Yuan Rong. Xianli had once found someone to carefully investigate the events of that year. Because Empress Dowager Ida was too concerned about the emperor's throne, Xianli found a woman who looked like Princess Yuan Rong and entered the palace to study with her. Xianli had also specially instructed that woman. Not long after that woman entered the palace, she was accidentally seen by Empress Dowager Ida. She was summoned to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. After a few days, that woman became a Junju. Not long after, Empress Dowager Ida suddenly died. In her previous life, Xian Li's explanation to Jiang Ruan was that his biological grandmother missed Xiao Gu all day and was overly worried. Thus, she had specially found someone who looked like Princess Yuan Rong to make her happy. At that time, Jiang Ruan had thought that Xian Li was being filial. Now that she thought about it, Empress Dowager Ida's sudden death could not be separated from that woman who had been conferred the title of Junju. No matter what, now that time had turned back, and she was fortunate enough to arrive before that woman entered the palace. Even Xianli had not thought of investigating Empress Dowager Ida's past. If she could not gain Empress Dowager Ida's trust, it would be too unjustifiable. Empress Dowager Ida looked at Jiang Ruan quietly, her gaze unexpectedly gentle. Everyone thought that the cold and hard Empress Dowager had been moved by the tragic life experience of the eldest Jiang Miss, but no one knew the excitement and surprise in her heart at this moment. This was because whether it was Jiang Ruan's dressing, smile, or words, they were exactly the same as Princess Yuan Rong. When the late emperor passed away, her position as Empress Dowager was unstable. The first prince, who was still the crown prince, was plotted against and killed, and the second prince was appointed as the new emperor. In desperation, she could only think of using Princess Yuan Rong for a peaceful marriage. Princess Yuan Rong stayed in the depths of the palace all year round, and people did not have many opportunities to see her. At that time, Princess Yuan Rong also liked to dress in peach pink. She was obviously a young lady of marriageable age, but she still liked to wear her hair in a single spiral bun, with a rose hairpin in her hair. With one look, one could tell that she was the pampered daughter of some family. Princess Yuan Rong had an excellent temperament. Although she was kind and pure, she was also excessively sensible. When she found out about the peaceful marriage, although she was unwilling, she did not stubbornly refuse to comply like the rumor said. She still remembered that day when Princess Yuan Rong boarded the bridal sedan. She gave her a long bow and said goodbye with a smile. This time, the mountains are high and the rivers are long. I don't know if I will be able to return to the land of the great Jin dynasty in the future, and look at the peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley with Empress Mother. She slowly said, take care. Every time Empress Dowager Ida thought of Princess Yuanrong's farewell bow, she felt an incomparable pain in her heart. The consequences were just as Princess Yuanrong had said. The mountains were high and the rivers were long, and they, mother and daughter, would be forever separated. They would never be able to look at the newly bloomed peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley together again. Now, Jiang Yuan was dressed exactly like Princess Yuanrong. When she gave her long bow, there was a sense of familiarity. The words she said made Empress Dowager Ida feel as if she was seeing Princess Yuanrong's voice and smile after dozens of years. She abruptly closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Almost all the people who knew about what had happened in the past were no longer in the court. The words that Princess Yuanrong had whispered to her could not be known by a second person. Jiang Yuan was still young, so naturally, no one had deliberately made her say it. The more she looked at Jiang Yuan, the more she felt that she resembled that person. In this world, was there reincarnation? If there was, could Jiang Yuan be the return of Princess Yuanrong? Empress Dowager Ida did not know that Jiang Yuan was indeed a reincarnated person, but she was not the kind and sensible Princess Yuanrong who had sacrificed herself for the sake of the overall situation. She was the reincarnation of the cowardly and ignorant Jiang Yuan, who had been deceived to the point of being covered in blood and tears. She had been reincarnated into the Jiang Yuan who talked cheerfully and wittily, but secretly killed people like scything flax. The reincarnation of the world had its own cause and effect. In this life, the words that Xianli had said to her had become the best tool for her to deal with Xianli. The longer Empress Dowager Ida remained silent, the more her heart ached for Jiang Yuan, the pitiful miss of the minister's fu. When Princess He saw Empress Dowager Ida acting like this, a trace of displeasure flashed in her eyes, and her gaze towards Jiang Yuan became somewhat sinister. Jiang Su's complexion was pale. She was born with fair skin, and this made her look even more like a piece of snow-white paper. Her usually elegant and refined facial features were now dull and tasteless, as if she was suffering from an illness. When Imperial Consort Chen saw that Jiang Yuan did not take advantage of the situation to make any other requests, the smile on her face became even more gentle, and it even contained a faint sympathy and comfort. It was like a young girl passing by a lake in Jiangnan, inadvertently seeing an injured rabbit, and holding it in her palms with an incomparable heartache. She said, "Poor child, this person has already passed away. You should look more at the future." The future? Naturally, it would look at the future. Jiang Yuan slightly lowered her head. In the future, she would watch as these people were destroyed bit by bit, becoming sacrifices for her revenge. "Many thanks to your Imperial Highness for being considerate," Jiang Yuan said. Ben Gong suddenly thought of something. Imperial Consort Chen smiled and looked at the Emperor. "Your Majesty, previously, this concubine thought that this eldest miss of the Jiang family was a good person. She knew when to advance and when to retreat, and was also very courteous. Now that I have heard her say this, my heart is also distressed. This concubine would like to trouble your Majesty to grant this concubine a wish." "What is my beloved concubine's wish?" The Emperor was in a high position and did not have too much soft-heartedness. His memory of Princess Yuanrong was already very faint, and Jiang Yuan was no different to him. At this moment, hearing Imperial Consort Chen's question, he took the opportunity to ask. Imperial Consort Chen smiled and looked at Jiang Yuan. "Such an obedient child, this concubine does not know if this concubine will have the good fortune to let her be this concubine's daughter-in-law." Silence. The entire audience was silent. When Jiang Su heard Imperial Consort Chen's words, her complexion became deathly white, and even her lips were pale. Her whole body swayed, and she seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. Fortunately, Xia Yan was calmly supporting her from the side, otherwise, there would have been an accident. The faces of the Zhao family also froze. What did Imperial Consort Chen mean by this? Beloved concubine means. The emperor asked. Little Eight's current age is also at the age of marriage, but this eldest Jiang Miss is still young. She can be engaged first, and when she reaches the marriageable age, she can enter Little Eight's fu and become the mistress of the household, Little Eight's legal concubine. If it had been silent just now, at this moment, only the sound of people sucking in a breath of cold air could be heard. It was actually the legal concubine. Although Jiang Quan's status was not low, if Jiang Wan were to become the 8th prince's concubine, it would still be somewhat of a social climber. If she were to become a side concubine, then it would be more appropriate. From Imperial Consort Chen's words just now, everyone had thought that she wanted Jiang Wan to become a side concubine. Who would have guessed that the moment she arrived, she wanted Jiang Wan to become the legal concubine? Now, anyone with the slightest bit of insight would know that the 8th prince might be the future heir apparent, the future emperor of the great Jin dynasty. Wouldn't Jiang Wan become the empress? This was a matter of small capital and huge profits. Jiang Quan's expression was complicated. He had always wanted to rope in his relationship with Xianli. In order to maintain a more stable relationship, it would be best if he could marry a daughter over. Now that Imperial Consort Chen's words had exposed the secret desire in his heart, he naturally couldn't ask for more. But how could that person be Jiang Wan? Why not Jiang Su Su? Jiang Xing fiercely clenched his fists. He hadn't expected that his good intentions would actually turn into the current situation. Although he wasn't optimistic about Xiao Xiao, he didn't like Xianli even more. No matter what, Xianli was a member of the imperial family. What was the imperial family? They had groups of wives and concubines, and the intrigues and schemes in the inner courtyard were even more dangerous than in the imperial court. How could he let Jiang Wan go to such a place? Why did Imperial Consort Chen want to drag Jiang Wan down? Wouldn't it be better if it was Jiang Su Su? Jiang Quan was happy. This was the best of both worlds. Why did it have to be Jiang Wan? Jiang Xing made a decision in his heart. If the emperor agreed, even if he had to fight against the imperial edict with all his meritorious services, he would exchange it for Jiang Ruan's freedom. When Xiao Xiao heard Imperial Consort Chen's request, he frowned. His beautiful eyes glowed with a cold luster, like a fine black gem. However, his long eyelashes drooped down to hide the emotions in his eyes. Only his temperament became even colder. He raised his eyes and glanced at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan's head was slightly lowered, and her expression could not be clearly seen. Xiao Xiao's heart was moved. No matter what, Jiang Ruan was only an 11-year-old girl. She hated Xianli so much. Although he didn't know why, she would definitely not be willing to marry Xianli. Imperial Consort Chen was favored by the emperor. If the emperor agreed, Jiang Wan would definitely not be able to resist the imperial edict. His heroic brows knitted tightly. In fact, it wasn't that he was completely helpless. If he went up to the emperor at this moment and asked to marry Jiang Wan, he could avoid the fate of Jiang Wan marrying Xianli. However, Jiang Wan might not necessarily want to marry him. Xiao Xiao had taken over the embroidered uniform guard. He had traveled outside all year round, and had also been infected with some of the habits of Jianghu. However, he also understood the rules of the aristocratic disciples in the capital. He understood what marriage meant to a woman. With his temperament, he would never marry in this lifetime. Jiang Wan was his benefactor who had saved his life. Even if this benefactor was only 11 years old, if she was in danger, Xiao Xiao would definitely abide by his original vow and lend a helping hand. However, was Jiang Wan really willing to change from the 8th prince's fu to the Jinying Wang fu? Empress Xu suddenly burst into laughter. How can Jie be randomly matchmaking? Not to mention whether or not 8th Highness knows about this matter, the eldest Jiang Miss in front of you is also Minister Jiang's most beloved daughter. Jie, Why don't you ask if eldest Jiang Miss is willing to marry 8th Highness? This tit for tat, Imperial Consort Chen did not even frown. She turned to look at Jiang Wan, her tone becoming increasingly gentle and amiable. Ben Gong has forgotten. Miss Jiang, do you fancy my Xiao Ba? This question was cordial and witty, as if it was a banter from an ordinary family. However, Jiang Wan silently sneered in her heart. Imperial Consort Chen's question was really good. What could she say? If she said no, it would mean that she looked down on Xianli. Not to mention in front of so many people, even the emperor would be the first to not forgive her. However, if she said she liked him, wouldn't that be jumping into a pit of fire? Everyone held their breath, waiting to hear Jiang Ruan's answer. The womenfolk were naturally indignant. The men, like Gu Yi and Jiang Xing, wished that they could rush up and immediately take Jiang Wan away from this troublesome place. Dong Yinger and Zhao Jin secretly broke into a cold sweat for Jiang Wan. To them, they naturally knew that Jiang Wan had never intended to marry into the imperial family. Zhao Guang was greatly shaken. The granddaughter he had just recognized was so quickly involved in this struggle for the throne. For the first time, Zhao Guang felt his own incompetence. He did not dare to block the entire General Fu to help Jiang Wan resist the imperial edict, even if his heart was bleeding at this moment. Li Shi, who had followed her daughter-in-law to the female side of the banquet, almost twisted the handkerchief in her hand into pieces. Jiang Wan seemed to be in a very difficult position. She did not immediately answer this. She lowered her head even more, but in her heart, she was calmly counting. Imperial Consort Chen's smile deepened, unexpectedly, such a shy child. Your Majesty, this concubine sees that this is an excellent marriage. I wonder if your Majesty is willing to be the matchmaker. Help little 8 find a suitable person. The Emperor's expression was relaxed, and he did not seem to want to obstruct her. Xiao Xiao's expression was cold and cheerless. He thought for a moment, and with one hand on his teacup, he was about to stand up and ask the Emperor to marry him. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to stand up, he heard a cold and hard voice say, Ijia is not willing. Jiang Wan counted to 3 in her heart. Hearing this, her lips curled into a smile, and she slowly raised her head. Following that person's words, she firmly said, replying to Imperial Consort Chen, Wan Yang is not willing. Chapter 101. Surprisingly, the first person to reject was Empress Dowager Ida. Xianli, who had been acting as if he had nothing to do with it, was stunned. The gentle smile on his face froze for a moment. Everyone else was puzzled, but Jiang Xing secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Since Empress Dowager Ida had spoken, even the Emperor would not easily refute it. No matter how much Imperial Consort Chen was favored, the Emperor would never go against Empress Dowager Ida's wishes for her. Imperial Consort Chen's life in the palace had always been smooth sailing. She didn't have any conflicts of interest with Empress Dowager Ida. In addition, she had an excellent reputation in the palace, so everyone liked her. Other than the Empress, Empress Dowager Ida was not close to these concubines, so they had been living in harmony. Who would have thought that today, in front of all the civil and military officials and their families, this most distinguished woman of the great Jin dynasty would mercilessly refute her suggestion? If it had been Empress Dowager Ida, then it would have been fine. But Jiang Wan had actually refused as well. What was wrong with her? The corners of Imperial Consort Chen's lips curled into a smile as she re-examined Jiang Wan. Initially, she had observed that Jiang Wan was able to advance and retreat appropriately. Her mannerisms did not seem to be those of an unfavored young miss of the minister's household. In addition to Xian Li's evaluation of her, she also believed that Jiang Wan was only a somewhat intelligent young girl. But now, it seemed that not only was she smart, but she was also very bold. Meeting Imperial Consort Chen's smiling gaze, Jiang Wan also smiled back. Her smile was humble and calm, as if it contained a different kind of emotion in her eyes. Imperial concubine Chen's movements became slightly sluggish. This was the first time she had encountered such a gaze in the world. That was provocation. Yet, his provocation was filled with the determination to win. Empress Dowager Yi De's sudden words caused Xiao Xiao, who was about to get up, to stop. Ah, Mo Tsong said in surprise, doesn't the Empress Dowager, the senior, never care about these trivial matters? That's strange. Could it be that the eldest miss of the Jiang family is so adorable that even the Empress Dowager treats her differently? Xiao Xiao looked pensive as his pitch-black eyes locked onto Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan never did things that she was not sure of. She had long expected that Empress Dowager Yi De would refute her. But, how did she know? Everyone present was puzzled, but no one had the guts to ask the question in their hearts. Jiang Ruan's gaze turned slightly cold. Naturally, she knew why. Imperial Consort Chen thought that she was absolutely safe, so in front of all the civil and military officials, she unscrupulously proposed to take her into the 8th prince's residence. However, her attire and appearance today were extremely similar to Princess Yuan Rong's. If it was anything else, it would have been fine, but it just had to be marriage. In such a situation, how could Empress Dowager Yi De not think of the past when Princess Yuan Rong was forced to marry into another country? She had purposely dawdled like that, appearing embarrassed and unwilling. Wasn't it to remind Empress Dowager Yi De, to remind her that Princess Yuan Rong had sacrificed her own happiness all her life in exchange for the stability of the great Jin dynasty? How could Empress Dowager Yi De remain indifferent to a forced marriage? Empress Dowager Yi De would sympathize with her, but at the same time, she would loathe Imperial Consort Chen from the bottom of her heart. No matter how much Imperial Consort Chen was favored, after offending such a noble woman in the Imperial Palace, how could she be as successful as she was in the past? Life was so precious, and she lived every minute and every second of it within her calculations. How could she be reconciled to the marriage proposed by Imperial Consort Chen? Imperial Consort Chen did not speak, but only looked at the emperor with a pair of beautiful eyes. That pair of watery eyes seemed to be covered with the misty rain of the Jiangnan water village, aggrieved and sad. With just one look, it made one's heart ache. As expected, the emperor said, Imperial Mother, why? Aijia wants to reward the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu today. The meaning of Imperial Consort Chen's words is not to reward, but to plunder. Empress Dowager Yi De said indifferently. Her tone was already somewhat sharp. The eldest daughter of the Jiang family is Deputy General Jiang's treasure. How could he be willing to marry off his own younger sister so early? Jiang Xing was startled, but in his heart, he was somewhat grateful to Empress Dowager Yi De. Without caring about anything else, he stood up and bowed deeply to the Empress Dowager. Many thanks for Empress Dowager's consideration, but this general is indeed unwilling to betroth my younger sister so early. There was a sudden sigh in the hall. No matter what Empress Dowager Yi De said, she was, after all, the Empress Dowager, and what she said was not important. However, Jiang Xing had just performed a meritorious deed, yet he had already refuted the emperor's most beloved imperial consort. Both brother and sister did not know what was good for them. It was simply ridiculous. Naturally, Xia Yan was extremely delighted. She couldn't wait for Jiang Xing and his sister to fiercely offend Imperial Consort Chen. It would be even better if they provoked the emperor so much that he would order them to die. On the other hand, Jiang Su's face regained some color. When she had first heard that Imperial Consort Chen had taken a liking to Jiang Ruan to be the 8th prince's wife, she had almost fainted. She could not understand why such a cultured, refined, and outstanding man would want Jiang Ruan, that sinister and cruel orphan with a face full of foxy charm, to be the imperial consort. Now that the Empress Dowager had stopped her, she slowly regained her composure. Needless to say, Jiang Li's eyes were full of jealousy. She was jealous of Jiang Ruan's luck, and hated herself for not having such an accomplished older brother. Jiang Dan, on the other hand, lowered her head and vigorously picked at her fingernails. She looked extremely nervous. Zhao Guang had just calmed down when he was startled by Jiang Xing's words. Guan Lianghan frowned and muttered, "Sister maniac." Being so protective, those who don't know would think that she's his daughter. Even the emperor's eyes flashed with a trace of displeasure. It was true that Jiang Xing had performed meritorious deeds, and he also admired this brave and resolute young man. However, this did not mean that he could tolerate Jiang Xing's disrespect towards the imperial consort. If there was no imperial power in his eyes, then even an astonishing talent could not remain in the Jin kingdom's court. Under the many disapproving gazes, Jiang Wan turned her head to look at Jiang Xing and smiled lightly. No matter what happened, in this life, she still had Jiang Xing by her side. He would stand by her side without any leeway. Even if he had to go against the whole world, he would not hesitate to protect her. Jiang Xing saw that Jiang Wan could still smile, and his heart was somewhat relieved. When Imperial Consort Chen heard Empress Dowager Ida's words, she giggled. That's true, this concubine had actually forgotten about this matter. It's just that Deputy General Jiang, no matter how much you dote on Miss Jiang, there will be a day when that Miss Jiang will marry, won't there? She looked at Jiang Wan with a smile. Her gaze was like the continuous drizzle of Jiangnan, with the slight chill of early spring, pervasive and slowly drilling into one's heart. Imperial Consort Chen said, "Miss Jiang, why are you unwilling? Wan Yang's status is lowly, and I really feel that I am not worthy of His Highness's dragon and phoenix emblem. I am ashamed." Jiang Wan lowered her head, and her tone was quite sincere. Xian Li's gaze moved. Jiang Wan was clearly making up an excuse. How could Jiang Wan be someone who felt lowly? He was also puzzled. Why did a little girl who was still wet behind the ears always have a faint hostility towards him? Xian Li believed that in everyone's hearts, he had a gentle and amiable appearance, and that countless women adored his gentle jade-like appearance. Even though Jiang Wan was still young and did not understand the relationship between a man and a woman, where did this hostility come from? Had he ever behaved improperly in front of Jiang Wan? Could it be because of Jiang Su? Thinking of this, he slowly relaxed. If it was only because of Jiang Su, it would be very easy to gain her trust. Imperial Consort Chen sighed softly, "Child, what are you talking about? If Xiao Ba had not personally come to ask, why would I suddenly bring up this matter?" Everyone was shocked. It was actually the 8th prince who had taken the initiative to bring it up. Xian Li frowned and put away the gentle and refined smile on his face. He got up and walked into the hall. His brows were handsome, his bearing was refined, and he carried the unique noble and gentle temperament of the royal family. His face was solemn as he solemnly knelt down in front of the emperor, reporting to Imperial Father, "This is exactly what I was thinking." He glanced at Jiang Wan, and his expression became somewhat gentle, like the spring breeze in early spring. When I saw eldest Jiang Miss on Ling Long boat, I was overwhelmed by her brilliance and beauty. After returning to the palace, I fell in love with her for 4 years. I was afraid that eldest Jiang Miss would blame me for being impetuous, so I asked Imperial Mother to help me. Xian Li said, "I am willing to take eldest Jiang Miss as my wife, to care for her, protect her, and love her for the rest of my life." He turned to Jiang Wan and slowly enunciated each word, "Miss Jiang, are you willing to be my, Xian Li's, wife?" Such a handsome young man was professing his love in front of all the civil and military officials. Moreover, he was the 8th prince, who had always been clean and virtuous. Countless young ladies present loved and hated him at the same time. They loved such a handsome man with outstanding bearing and deep feelings. They hated that they were not the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu and had such great luck. After listening to the 8th prince's words, Jiang Su was on the verge of collapsing. At first, she had been secretly delighted, but now, it had been replaced by a bone-deep hatred. She had never been as jealous of Jiang Ruan as she was right now. A crazy jealousy. What right did Jiang Ruan have to snatch away her status as the eldest daughter, and also to snatch away her sweetheart? Jiang Ruan looked at Xianli indifferently. Since her rebirth, Xianli was like a fly that had eaten into her stomach. She always avoided him as much as she could. This was the first time she was so close to him. There was clearly not a trace of ease in his eyes, but the words he said were so moving and sincere. In a trance, time flowed back, and she returned to her previous life. The peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley were pink and passionate. She did not know what to do. Xianli stood under the peach blossoms and looked at her with a gentle and considerate smile. He said, "Ruan, I really like you. I really like you." His words were so pleasant to hear. He only said that he liked her, but did not mention marriage. He said that he could not give her a status, so she believed him and was considerate of his difficulties. In her previous life, how she wished she could hear Xianli say, "Are you willing to be my wife?" In order to become his wife, in order to be worthy of a word of his love. She wronged herself by entering the murderous palace in place of Jiang Su. She was abused, humiliated, ridiculed, and ruthlessly trampled into dust. How could he turn a blind eye? When he finished using her, he announced that she was a demoness who brought calamity to the country. When he saw her fall miserably in the main hall, did he remember that day in Ningshui Valley, under the peach tree, those words, "Ruan, I really like you." In this life, she finally heard those words, "Are you willing to be my wife?" But so what? She no longer cared about it. Xianli looked at Jiang Ruan. He was confident that Jiang Ruan had not been doted on by her father since she was a child. Her mother had died early, and she had lived in a rural residence for 5 years. For such a person, as long as someone treated her a little better, she would be deeply grateful and like them. It was very easy to move her heart. But as he looked at Jiang Ruan, his smile suddenly and slowly froze. What kind of a pair of eyes were those? They were as beautiful as a clear spring in a mountain stream, but they were as desolate as black poppies that bloomed in a wasteland. The emotions surging in those eyes were intense yet calm. It was not love or affection, nor did it belong to any kind of joy. It was not love, it was hate. Xianli stared blankly. He had not seen wrongly. It was hate, a hate that seemed to be in the bones, a hate that could not wait to devour his flesh and blood and drink his blood. And within that hate, there was a kind of disgust, as if he was some rotten thing. His expression slowly froze. Why? Under such a strong emotion, complicated gaze of love and hate, Xianli's mind was a kind of blank, as if he did not know how to face it next. Facing Jiang Ruan's gaze, his heart unexpectedly gave birth to a faint fear. Why was this? He tried his best to figure it out, but then he saw the young girl in front of him suddenly reveal a sneer at him. With a faint sneer, she said in a powerful and resonant voice, "I am not willing." Jiang Ruan proudly raised her chin. Her tone was clearly humble, but her expression was like that of a high and mighty princess. "I am indebted to your highness's kind intentions, but this subject's daughter's ambition does not lie here. Your highness's words have caused this subject's daughter's heart to be frightened, and I really do not dare to claim such a high position." As she finished speaking, she bent down and kowtowed to the emperor. "I hope that your majesty will grant my wish." No matter how passionate Xianli's words were, her heart was like stone, and her posture remained unmoved. The smile on Imperial Consort Chen's face deepened, and the light in her eyes fluctuated. Unexpectedly, she did not appear to be angry at all. Although the emperor was angry at Jiang Ruan's unappreciative action, he could not force Jiang Ruan to agree to Xianli in front of all the civil and military officials. He waved his hand somewhat irritably. "Since this is the case, it means that you and Lao Ba are not fated to be together." Xian Li's expression did not look good. He did not expect that today's matter, which he had a well-thought-out card up his sleeves, would be ruined by Jiang Ruan's cold and hard words. He looked at Jiang Ruan inquiringly. He really did not understand why Jiang Ruan had rejected him without even thinking. Her expression did not loosen in the slightest, so why did she reveal such hatred towards him? If it was only for Jiang Su, why did she hate him so deeply? Jiang Ruan took in Xian Li's expression and sneered silently in her heart. In this life, he still used the same method as in her previous life, hoping to buy her heart and let her work for him. How could there be such a cheap thing in this world? Did Xian Li think that just because he was willing to condescend to deceive others, others should be deeply grateful to him? Mo Tsong shook his head, and said in a rather regretful tone, "This eighth prince is really infinitely romantic. Unfortunately, he met the Jiang family's poisonous Mississippi. He is destined to be ignored." Xiao Xiao looked at Jiang Ruan indifferently. Those who practiced martial arts had good eyesight. Just now, he had clearly seen the gaze that Jiang Ruan had used to look at Xian Li. There was not the slightest trace of love in it, but the hatred made people feel somewhat puzzled. How could she hate Xian Li so much? For a moment, it made people feel as if she had almost disappeared, as if she did not originally belong to this world. Suppressing the thoughts in his heart, Xiao Xiao suddenly frowned. His many years of intuition made him sensitive to the fact that something was wrong in the air. He gently pressed the dagger at his waist. During the palace banquet, officials were not allowed to carry weapons, but he was an exception. The emperor made an exception and allowed him to bring one. Xian Li and Jiang Ruan bowed and regretfully returned to their seats. Their sad appearance made the palace womenfolk feel extremely distressed. On one hand, they rejoiced that Jiang Ruan had not accepted Xian Li, but on the other hand, they secretly cursed Jiang Ruan for not knowing what was good for her, for making such a celestial being sad. Jiang Ruan and Jiang Xing smiled slightly. After this incident, the emperor's mood had also been greatly disturbed. With a wave of his hand, he said, "Begin the banquet." The palace maids serving the dishes entered in a line, each carrying a tray in their hands. Among them, the palace maid in the lead had a graceful figure, clear and elegant features, and was dressed differently from the other palace maids. Behind her were two palace maids dressed differently, each of them carrying a tray as they walked towards the emperor. One of them stood in place, while the other two began to pour wine for the empress and empress dowager. The palace maid beside the empress took out silver chopsticks and prepared to dip them in the wine. The palace maid in the lead was in the midst of pouring wine. Her hand had just lifted the wine pot when she suddenly pulled out a dagger from under the white cloth and ruthlessly thrust it towards the emperor's chest. With a chi sound, a strong gust of wind mixed with something came over, causing the palace maid's dagger to deviate and miss the fatal spot. Unexpectedly, it was a golden button. On the high seat, almost at the same time, Xiao Xiao flew up and rushed towards the emperor's side. Guan Lianghan's expression froze, and he fiercely slammed the table and stood up. The surrounding matrons had never seen such a scene before, and they all shrieked in alarm. The palace maids dressed in pink were simultaneously startled, and a few of them suddenly flew up, pulling out the flexible swords hidden at their waists, and rushed straight towards the emperor's face. "Dog Emperor, hand over your life," the women shouted. They had actually mixed in with the palace maids serving the banquet. There were at least a few hundred palace maids serving the palace banquet today, and with such chaos, the palace hall was in a complete mess. The emperor was greatly shaken, and the imperial bodyguards desperately shouted, "Protect the emperor! Protect the emperor!" The emperor's side was protected impeccably, but the assassins did not limit themselves to only taking the emperor's life. They actually started a massacre in the palace hall, killing whoever they caught. The women's side of the banquet were all defenseless women and young ladies, and the assassins specifically targeted the women's side of the banquet. For a moment, only the sound of flesh and blood could be heard, and screams and shouts could be heard incessantly. Just by listening to the sounds, one could tell how desperate the situation was. Jiang Su had long been so frightened that she hid under the table, watching as a dainty young lady was chopped into 2 pieces before her eyes. She was so frightened that her face was ashen, but her temperament was much steadier than Jiang Li, who only knew how to scream. Xia Yan was also scared to death. She hugged Jiang Su in her arms and hid under the table. The 2 of them hid under the corpses, and at a glance, nothing could be seen. Jiang Dan was also scared to death, but she did not hide, nor did she scream like Jiang Li. In the midst of the chaos, she unexpectedly showed a trace of calmness. After thinking for a moment, as if she had made up her mind, she lifted her skirt and ran towards the men's side of the banquet. No one had expected such an unforeseen event, and the emperor had been moved extremely quickly. They had originally thought that the assassins would stop, but who knew that they would be so deranged as to kill without hesitation. When the palace hall was in chaos, it was even easier for something to happen. In the midst of the chaos, Jiang Xing could no longer see Jiang Ruan's figure. However, as the deputy general, he could not abandon a room full of women and children. He could only help the poor resist the assassins while he secretly searched for Jiang Ruan's figure. The sons of the Zhao family also joined in the battle, but who knew that these assassins also seemed to have received sophisticated training. They were not in a hurry to deal with people who had martial arts skills, and they specifically made their way towards the women and children. The imperial bodyguards and generals had to consider that they could not accidentally injure the families of the courtiers, so it was inevitable that they would show mercy. This gave these assassins an opening, and they became even more unscrupulous. Zhao Jin and Wen Fei came from a military family, so in the face of such a situation, they did not panic and showed a rare calmness. Zhao Jin said, Fei, take the other sisters and leave first. I will go look for Wan Mimi and Ning Er. Wen Fei hesitated, can you do it alone? It's alright, I will be careful. Zhao Jin settled the sisters down and picked up the flexible sword that had fallen from a slain assassin. Coincidentally, she saw Dong Yinger being forced into a corner, and the flexible sword in the assassin's hand was about to pierce Dong Yinger's chest. Anxious, Zhao Jin threw the flexible sword towards the assassin's back. She threw it with great force, and the assassin could not dodge in time. He was suddenly stabbed, and the sword in his hand slid down powerlessly. Dong Yinger had long been frightened to the point of tears. At this moment, seeing Zhao Jin was like seeing her savior, Jin, her. Zhao Jin hurriedly ran over to help her up, are you alright? Dong Yinger looked behind her, and her eyes widened in fear. Zhao Jin felt that something was wrong, and when she turned around, she saw a fierce face, go to hell. Immediately after, a silver light flashed, and Zhao Jin closed her eyes in despair. Unexpectedly, she felt her body lighten, and heard the sound of something heavy falling to the ground. She opened her eyes in shock, and saw a young man carrying both her and Dong Yinger in one hand. With a long sword in his hand, he danced extremely well. Zhao Jin was born in a military family, and had looked down on her elder brothers and father practicing swordsmanship. However, she had never seen anyone who danced with a sword so beautifully. His facial features were not as rough as those of her father and brother, but had the elegance and handsomeness of a scholar. However, within that handsomeness, there was also a trace of determination and courage. Dong Yinger was also stunned, and a captivating blush suddenly appeared on her cheeks. Jiang Xing rescued the 2 of them and placed them in a corner, stay here, don't move. After saying this, he did not look back and joined the battle. Dong Yinger asked softly, who is he? Zhao Jin shook her head, I don't know. Looking at the back of that tall figure disappearing from the palace hall, she unexpectedly felt a little nervous and worried for this stranger. Not to mention the situation on this side, Jiang Wan had covered herself extremely well when she arrived at this moment. Although the emperor had moved, the empress was still here. There were many imperial bodyguards by the empress side, so there was no need to worry. When Jiang Yuan turned her head, she saw a few assassins pushing Empress Dowager Yi De into a corner. She did not know why, but they all seemed to want to deal with Empress Dowager Yi De. Xianli had just settled Imperial Consort Chen down, and when he saw this scene, he was stunned and was about to run over. Jiang Yuan raised her eyebrows, and without saying anything, when the assassin in the middle was about to stab Empress Dowager Yi De's chest, she exclaimed, "Empress Dowager." Her movements were faster than her voice, and she suddenly rushed over, pushing Empress Dowager Yi De to the side, and straightened her body to meet the tip of the sword. She turned her head and smiled coldly at the astonished Xianli. "Look, the show has just begun. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.